There is a scene near the end of Dexter's 4th season that has lived rent-free in the minds of millions of viewers since the day it aired. Dexter Morgan, the serial killer who kills serial killers, has just finished the biggest hunt of his life. He has spent an entire season tracking a man called the Trinity Killer, a monster who murdered in cycles of 3, bathtub drownings, forced suicides off of buildings, and bludgeonings with a hammer. Dexter caught him. Dexter killed him. And as he drove home that night, he believed, truly believed, that he had won, that his family was safe, that the nightmare was over. He called his wife Rita on the way home. She didn't answer. He figured she was asleep, or maybe she was still packing for their trip to the Keys. He let himself into the house. The lights were off. He walked through the living room. Everything seemed fine. And then he heard it, a faint, rhythmic sound coming from the bathroom, not running water, not the hum of a fan. It was something else entirely. He pushed open the bathroom door, and there she was. Rita, his wife, the woman he had spent years learning to love, the woman who made him believe he could be something more than a monster, lying dead in the bathtub. Her blood had pooled on the white porcelain and spilled onto the tile floor. And sitting in that blood, crying, reaching up toward his father with tiny hands, was baby Harrison. Dexter's infant son, born in blood, exactly the way Dexter himself had been born decades earlier. The Trinity Killer had gotten to her first. Before Dexter could stop him, before the police could close in, Arthur Mitchell had walked into the Morgan home and completed his cycle. The man Dexter had spent the entire season trying to outsmart had outsmarted him in the cruelest possible way. And the image of that baby sitting in his mother's blood became the defining image of the entire series. It echoed backward to Dexter's own origin, and it echoed forward into everything that came after. But to understand why that moment hit so hard, why it shattered everything the show had built, and why it changed Dexter Morgan forever, you need to go back to the very beginning. Because the story of Dexter is really the story of one question asked over and over and over again across 8 seasons, 2 sequel series, and 1 prequel. Can a monster become a man? And the answer the show keeps giving through twist after devastating twist is no. Not really, not without losing everything. So let's start where it all started, not with the Trinity Killer, not with Rita's death, but with a shipping container on the Miami docks sometime in the early 1970s, where a 3-year-old boy sat in 2 inches of his mother's blood for 2 full days before anyone found him. Dexter premiered on Showtime on October 1st, 2006. It was based on a novel called Darkly Dreaming Dexter, written by Jeff Lindsay and published in 2004. The show was developed for television by James Manos Jr., and it starred Michael C. Hall in the title role. The premise was simple and deeply unsettling. Dexter Morgan works as a blood spatter analyst for the Miami Metro Police Department. He is very good at his job. He is polite, well-liked by his colleagues, and seemingly unremarkable in every way. He brings donuts to the office. He dates a woman named Rita Bennett, who has 2 kids from a previous marriage. He has a close relationship with his adoptive sister, Deborah Morgan, who also works at Miami Metro as a detective. But Dexter has a secret, a very big one. He is a serial killer. He has been killing people since he was a teenager. Not randomly, though, not chaotically. Dexter operates under something called the Code of Harry, a set of rules created by his adoptive father, Harry Morgan, a Miami police officer who recognized early on that his adopted son had violent, homicidal urges that could not be suppressed. Harry didn't try to cure Dexter. He didn't send him to therapy or lock him away. Instead, Harry did something radical and deeply questionable. He channeled those urges. He taught Dexter how to kill and how to get away with it, but only under strict conditions. Rule 1, never get caught. Rule 2, only kill people who deserve it, meaning other killers who have slipped through the cracks of the justice system. Rule 3, always confirm the target's guilt with evidence before making a move. And Rule 4, blend in, be normal, fake the emotions you don't feel. Learn to laugh at jokes, learn to comfort people, learn to seem human even though you believe you are not. This is the foundation of the entire Dexter universe. A serial killer with a moral code, a monster with rules, a predator who only hunts other predators. And for the first few seasons of the show, this framework worked beautifully. Dexter believed he was a psychopath incapable of real emotion, and the audience watched him slowly, reluctantly, begin to feel things he was told he could never feel. Love for Rita, protectiveness over Deborah, a strange, fractured form of empathy that kept sneaking in around the edges of his carefully constructed mask. But the show was never going to let that last, because Dexter is, at its core, a tragedy. Every season follows the same arc. Dexter believes he has found balance. Dexter encounters a new threat that tests that balance, and by the end, something has been ripped away from him, usually something he didn't even know he cared about until it was gone. The origin of all of this, the original sin of the entire franchise, happened in a shipping container at the port of Miami. Dexter's biological mother was a woman named Laura Moser. She was a confidential informant working with the Miami police, feeding information about drug dealers to a detective named Harry Morgan. Harry and Laura were also having an affair. Laura had 2 sons, Brian and Dexter. When the drug dealers Laura was informing on discovered what she was doing, they killed her. Not quickly, not mercifully. They used a chainsaw and left her in pieces inside that shipping container. Her 2 boys were in there with her. 3-year-old Dexter and his older brother Brian sat in their mother's blood for 2 days before Harry Morgan opened that container and found them. Harry took Dexter home. He adopted him. He raised him as his own son alongside his biological daughter, Deborah. But here is the part that would echo through the entire series and become one of its most painful recurring themes. Harry left Brian behind. Brian Moser went into the foster care system. He bounced from home to home. Nobody saved him. Nobody gave him a code. Nobody taught him how to channel his trauma into something controlled. Brian grew up feral, damaged, and furious. And decades later, he came back. That's the setup. That's the world. A blood spatter analyst who kills killers. A code built by a father who loved his son but couldn't fix him. An origin story drenched in actual blood. And a brother, abandoned in the system, who would return as the very first great villain of the series and deliver the very first gut punch twist that told audiences this show was not going to play it safe. The show ran for 8 original seasons, from 2006 to 2013, totaling 96 episodes. It spawned a sequel limited series called Dexter New Blood in 2021, a prequel series called Dexter Original Sin in 2024, and a second sequel series called Dexter Resurrection that began airing in 2025. Across the entire franchise, there are 126 episodes, 11 seasons, and 4 distinct series. Michael C. Hall has appeared in or voiced every single iteration. Jennifer Carpenter played Deborah Morgan throughout the original run and returned in a vision capacity for New Blood. The show won 4 Emmy Awards, including Outstanding Directing for a Drama Series for the Season 4 finale, and Outstanding Guest Actor for John Lithgow's portrayal of the Trinity Killer. Michael C. Hall was nominated 5 times for Outstanding Lead Actor in a Drama Series, but never won. The show was nominated for Outstanding Drama Series 4 consecutive times, making it the first Showtime drama ever to receive that nomination. Season 2 holds the highest Rotten Tomatoes score of the franchise at 96%. The series finale of the original run holds one of the lowest IMDb ratings of any major television finale, somewhere between 4.6 and 4.9 out of 10. But we're not here to talk about ratings, we're here to talk about the twists, the moments that made you sit up, the moments that made you rewind, the moments that, if you're watching this to fall asleep, will still tug at something in the back of your mind as you drift off. Because Dexter is a show built on revelations, every season has at least one moment where the ground shifts under your feet, where the thing you thought was true turns out to be a lie, and the lie turns out to be something even worse than the truth. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's walk through every major plot twist in the Dexter franchise, from the very first season to the most recent. We'll take it slow, we'll go deep, and by the end, you'll either have a completely new understanding of one of television's most complex characters, or you'll be peacefully asleep. Either way, you win. Let's start with Season 1 and the twist that set the tone for everything that followed. The reveal of the Ice Truck Killer. Season 1 of Dexter introduced a villain who would become the template for every antagonist that followed. The show called him the Ice Truck Killer, and from the very first episode, it was clear that this killer was different from the other criminals Dexter encountered. The Ice Truck Killer was precise, methodical, almost artistic. His victims were prostitutes, and he drained them completely of blood before dismembering them with surgical precision and leaving the body parts in public places around Miami. There was no mess, no chaos, no passion in the killing itself, just cold, clinical perfection. This immediately caught Dexter's attention, not as a forensic analyst, but as a fellow killer. Dexter recognized the skill involved. He recognized the patience, and more importantly, he recognized something deeply personal in the way the kills were staged. The ice truck killer wasn't just killing. He was communicating, and the messages seemed to be directed specifically at Dexter. At one of the crime scenes, the killer left a Barbie doll, chopped into pieces and frozen. At another, he left a display that referenced childhood trauma in a way that felt uncomfortably intimate. The body parts were bloodless, which mirrored the shipping container where Dexter's mother had been murdered, and the blood had pooled on the floor, leaving everything above it eerily clean. These weren't random choices. Whoever this killer was, he knew about Dexter's past. He knew about the shipping container, he knew about Laura Moser, and he was reaching out. Miami Metro assigned the case to their homicide division, and Deborah Morgan, Dexter's adoptive sister, was given her first shot at working a major investigation. She threw herself into it, working long hours, chasing leads, and slowly building a profile of the killer. Meanwhile, Dexter was conducting his own parallel investigation, one that went much deeper and much darker than anything the police were doing. He was drawn to this killer, fascinated by him. And as the season progressed, that fascination began to feel less like professional curiosity and more like recognition. While all of this was happening, Deborah started dating a man named Rudy Cooper. Rudy was a prosthetics specialist, charming and attentive, exactly the kind of guy Deborah deserved after years of bad relationships and emotional neglect from her family. He was warm, he was supportive, he seemed to genuinely care about her. The relationship moved quickly, and by the middle of the season, Deborah was falling hard for him. The audience watched this romance develop alongside the ice truck killer investigation, and for a while, the two storylines seemed completely separate. Rudy was the nice boyfriend. The ice truck killer was the season's monster. They existed in different worlds, or so it appeared. The show dropped hints throughout the season, small things that were easy to miss on a first viewing but impossible to ignore on a rewatch. Rudy's background didn't quite add up. His knowledge of anatomy was suspiciously detailed, even for someone who worked with prosthetics. And there were moments, brief flashes, where his warmth seemed to flicker, replaced by something colder and more calculating. But the show was clever about misdirection. It dangled other suspects, it kept the audience guessing, and it saved the real reveal for the final stretch of the season. In episode 8, the truth began to emerge. Rudy Cooper was not who he said he was. His real name was Brian Moser. He was Dexter's biological brother, the other boy in the shipping container, the child Harry Morgan had left behind when he rescued Dexter from that blood-soaked nightmare decades earlier. Brian had grown up in the foster care system, moving from home to home, developing the same violent urges that Dexter had, but without anyone to guide him. There was no Harry Morgan in Brian's life. There was no code, there was no structure, no rules, no channel for the darkness. Brian became a killer anyway, but his kills were motivated by something Dexter's were not. Brian wasn't killing because of a compulsion he couldn't control. He was killing to get his brother's attention. Every frozen body part, every bloodless crime scene, every carefully staged display was a message. A love letter, in the most twisted sense of the word, from one brother to another. Brian had spent years tracking Dexter down. He had studied his life from a distance. He knew about Dexter's job at Miami Metro. He knew about Harry's code. And he had devised a plan to reconnect with the only family he had left. But Brian didn't just want a reunion. He wanted Dexter to join him. To abandon the code, abandon the fake life, abandon the pretense of normalcy, and embrace what they both truly were. Two brothers born in blood, two killers shaped by the same trauma. Brian believed they belonged together. The relationship with Deborah was never real. Brian targeted her specifically because she was Dexter's adoptive sister. Getting close to Deborah was Brian's way of getting close to Dexter. Every date, every kiss, every tender moment between Rudy and Deborah was a manipulation designed to position Brian exactly where he needed to be. And when the time was right, Brian made his move. He kidnapped Deborah. He brought her to the same building where years earlier, one of the ice truck killer's first victims had been found. He strapped her to a table, the same way Dexter strapped his own victims to tables before killing them. And then he waited for Dexter to arrive. When Dexter found them, Brian made his pitch. Join me. Be who you really are. We don't need Harry's rules. We don't need to pretend. We're the same, you and I. We were made in the same blood, the same trauma. The only difference between us is that someone saved you and nobody saved me. It was a devastating argument, and for a moment, the show let you wonder if Dexter might actually consider it. Brian wasn't wrong about the facts. They were brothers. They did share the same origin. And Dexter had always struggled with the feeling that his entire life was a performance, that the normal Dexter everyone knew was a mask covering something much darker. But Dexter looked at Deborah, his sister, not by blood but by choice, the person who had been there his entire life, the person who loved him without knowing what he was. And he made his choice. Dexter killed Brian Moser. He slit his brother's throat and staged the scene to look like a suicide, mimicking the method Brian himself had used on his victims. It was the first truly emotionally significant kill of the series. Dexter had killed dozens of people by this point in the show, but none of those kills carried weight. They were mechanical, satisfying in a procedural way, but emotionally hollow. Brian's death was different. Dexter cried afterward. He collapsed on the floor of Brian's apartment and wept, genuinely wept, for the brother he never knew he had, and the brother he had just been forced to destroy. This twist reframed the entire first season. Every scene between Rudy and Deborah became retroactively horrifying. Every clue the ice truck killer left at crime scenes became a breadcrumb trail leading to one of the most personal revelations in television. And the choice Dexter made, blood family versus chosen family, set the thematic foundation for the rest of the series. Brian Moser was played by Christian Camargo, and even though his character died in the Season 1 finale, titled Born Free, he returned in later seasons as a hallucination and a vision. In Season 2, Dexter mourned his brother's death while dealing with the consequences of his own killing history. In Season 6, Brian appeared as an alternate version of Dexter's dark passenger, replacing Harry as the voice in Dexter's head and urging him to embrace chaos rather than control. The fact that Brian kept coming back even after death speaks to how foundational this twist was. Dexter never fully recovered from the revelation that his brother existed, that his brother was a monster, and that he had to be the one to end him. It planted a seed of guilt and loneliness that grew throughout the entire series. If Dexter couldn't even keep the one person who truly understood him, what hope did he have of connecting with anyone? And that question, as it turned out, was exactly what Season 2 was designed to answer. Because while Season 1 threatened to expose Dexter through a single killer who knew his secret, Season 2 threatened to expose him in a way that was far more dangerous. Season 2 put Dexter's entire killing history on display for the world to see. And it introduced a name that would haunt the franchise for over 15 years. The Bay Harbor Butcher. Season 2 of Dexter begins with one of the most terrifying scenarios imaginable for a serial killer. Somebody found the bodies. For years, Dexter had been disposing of his victims in the same way. He would kill them, dismember them according to a precise ritual, seal the remains in heavy-duty garbage bags, load those bags onto his boat, motor out into the ocean off the coast of Miami, and drop them into the water at a specific location. It was efficient. It was methodical. And for a long time, it worked perfectly. The ocean is vast, the currents are unpredictable, and nobody had any reason to go looking in that particular stretch of water until a group of recreational scuba divers went exploring in exactly the wrong place. They descended into the deep blue off the coast of Miami and found something that should not have been there. Dozens of garbage bags, weighted down with rocks, sitting on the ocean floor, and inside those bags were the dismembered remains of Dexter's victims. Miami Metro launched the biggest investigation in its history. The FBI was called in. A special task force was assembled, led by a veteran agent named Frank Lundy, played by Keith Carradine, a methodical, patient investigator who approached the case with the same kind of calm precision that Dexter brought to his kills. The media gave the unknown killer a name, the Bay Harbor Butcher. And just like that, Dexter was no longer an anonymous predator operating in the shadows. He was the subject of the most high-profile murder investigation in Florida. The horror of Dexter's situation cannot be overstated. He didn't just work near the investigation, he worked inside it. Every day, he went to the same office where the task force was analyzing evidence from his kills. He sat in briefings where Frank Lundy presented theories about who the butcher might be. He examined blood spatter evidence from crime scenes connected to his own victims. He was, in the most literal sense possible, investigating himself. This created a season-long tension that was almost unbearable. Every conversation became a potential trap. Every piece of evidence was a thread that, if pulled, could unravel everything. And Dexter had to navigate all of it while maintaining his carefully constructed facade of normalcy, continuing to work, continuing to date Rita, continuing to be the unremarkable lab guy who brought donuts and made small talk. But Dexter wasn't the only one who sensed something was off. There was one person at Miami Metro who had never bought Dexter's act. Sergeant James Dokes, played by Eric King, had been suspicious of Dexter since long before the Bay Harbor butcher investigation began. Dokes was a former Special Forces operative with sharp instincts and an aggressive personality. He didn't like Dexter, he didn't trust Dexter, and unlike everyone else at the precinct, he couldn't be charmed or deflected. Dokes followed Dexter, he watched him, he noted the inconsistencies in his behavior, and eventually, Dokes discovered the truth. He found Dexter's kill tools, he confronted him. And for a brief, electrifying stretch of the season, Dokes had Dexter dead to rights. The serial killer who had evaded detection for years was finally caught, not by the FBI, not by a rival killer, but by a stubborn cop who simply refused to look the other way. What happened next became one of the most controversial and consequential twists in the series. Dexter didn't kill Dokes, not directly. Instead, he captured Dokes and held him in a remote cabin in the Everglades while he figured out what to do. Meanwhile, Dexter had been entangled in a toxic relationship with a woman named Lila West, played by Jamie Murray. Lila was Dexter's sponsor in a Narcotics Anonymous program that he was attending as a cover story. She was unstable, manipulative, and dangerously obsessive. And when she discovered where Dexter was keeping Dokes, she took matters into her own hands. Lila blew up the cabin with Dokes inside. She killed him. And in doing so, she solved Dexter's biggest problem. Because when the investigators sifted through the wreckage, they found evidence that Dokes had been living there. Evidence that connected him to the Bay Harbor butcher case. Dexter had already been subtly planting false leads throughout the season, manipulating evidence to make Dokes look like a plausible suspect. With Dokes dead and unable to defend himself, the case was closed. Sergeant James Dokes was officially declared the Bay Harbor butcher. The investigation ended, Dexter was free. But the cost was enormous. An innocent man was dead. A good cop, a man who had been right about everything, who had seen through Dexter's mask when no one else could, had been murdered and posthumously branded as one of the worst serial killers in Miami history. His name was destroyed, his legacy was erased, and Dexter walked away without a scratch. Dexter then tracked Lila to Paris, where she had fled after the cabin explosion. He found her apartment, he confronted her, and he killed her, eliminating the last person who knew his secret. It was cold, efficient, and entirely in keeping with the code. Lila had killed someone. She was a threat. She deserved what she got, at least by the code's logic. But the audience knew it was more complicated than that. Dexter wasn't just protecting himself from exposure. He was cleaning up a mess that he had created. Dokes died because of Dexter. Lila killed Dokes because of Dexter. Every domino that fell in Season 2 fell because Dexter chose to keep killing instead of stopping. The Bay Harbor Butcher storyline didn't end when Season 2 ended. It became a ghost that haunted the franchise for over a decade. In Season 7, Captain Maria Laguerta, who had always believed Dokes was innocent, reopened the case and began to suspect Dexter. Her investigation led directly to one of the most devastating twists in the series, which we'll get to later. In Dexter New Blood, set nearly 10 years after the original series, the Bay Harbor Butcher name resurfaced when a podcast host named Molly Park began connecting dots between the old case and Dexter's new identity. The name followed Dexter across state lines, across years, across identities. You can change your name, you can move to a small town in upstate New York, you can grow a beard and get a girlfriend and pretend to be someone else entirely. But the bodies don't go away, the evidence doesn't disappear. And the lies you told to cover your tracks have a way of surfacing at the worst possible moment. Season 2 also introduced a dynamic that would recur throughout the series. The idea that Dexter's greatest threat wasn't another killer, it was discovery. The ice truck killer threatened Dexter's family. The Bay Harbor Butcher investigation threatened Dexter's freedom. And in the seasons that followed, each new villain would threaten something different, pushing Dexter closer and closer to the one thing the code was designed to prevent: getting caught. The Rotten Tomatoes score for Season 2 sits at 96%, the highest of any season in the franchise. Critics praise the sustained tension, the moral complexity of framing Dokes, and Keith Carradine's understated performance as Frank Lundy. Audiences responded too. The ratings climbed significantly from Season 1, and the show began to establish itself as one of the premier dramas on cable television. But for all the critical praise, the real legacy of Season 2 is simpler and darker. It proved that Dexter would sacrifice anyone to survive. He didn't pull the trigger on Dokes himself, but he created the conditions that made Dokes' death inevitable. He didn't plan for Lila to blow up the cabin, but he didn't stop her either. And when it was over, Dexter didn't mourn, he didn't lose sleep, he moved on. That cold pragmatism is what makes Dexter compelling and what makes him terrifying. Because the audience roots for him, we're inside his head, we hear his thoughts, we understand his logic. And when Dokes dies and the case closes, there's a part of us, a guilty, uncomfortable part that feels relieved. We wanted Dexter to get away with it, and the show knew that. It was designed to make us complicit in his crimes, one season at a time. Season 3 would test Dexter in a completely different way. Instead of a hunter chasing him down, Season 3 gave Dexter something he had never had before. A friend, a real one, someone who knew his secret and accepted it, someone who wanted to be his partner. And as Dexter would learn, a friend who knows what you are is far more dangerous than an enemy who suspects it. Season 3 of Dexter opens with a mistake, not a small one, not a misread clue or a misidentified target. Dexter kills the wrong person. During what was supposed to be a routine hunt, Dexter ends up in a physical confrontation with a man named Oscar Prado and kills him in self-defense. Oscar wasn't a serial killer, he wasn't a rapist or a child predator or any of the other categories that the Code of Harry was designed to target. He was just a man who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and Dexter killed him. This accidental death sets the entire season in motion because Oscar Prado has a brother. And that brother is one of the most powerful men in Miami. Miguel Prado, played by Jimmy Smits, is an assistant district attorney with political ambitions, a commanding presence, and a reputation for being tough on crime. He is charming, intelligent, and deeply passionate about justice. When his brother Oscar turns up dead, Miguel channels his grief into a righteous fury that draws him directly into Dexter's orbit. The two men begin circling each other. Miguel is investigating his brother's death. Dexter is trying to cover his tracks, and in the process, they form an unlikely bond that starts with shared drinks at a bar and evolves into something much more complicated. Because Miguel discovers Dexter's secret, he figures out, piece by piece, that Dexter Morgan is a killer. And instead of being horrified, Miguel is fascinated. This was new territory for the show. In Season 1, Brian Moser knew Dexter's secret but was a fellow killer trying to recruit him. In Season 2, Dokes knew the secret and tried to stop him. But Miguel was neither of those things. Miguel was a civilian, a lawyer, a man with a moral framework that should have been repulsed by what Dexter did. And yet Miguel didn't just accept it, he embraced it. He wanted in. Miguel pitched Dexter on a partnership. He argued that the justice system was broken, that criminals slipped through the cracks every day, and that someone needed to do something about it. Sound familiar? It was essentially the same argument that Harry Morgan had made when he created the code. The only difference was that Harry built safeguards into the system. Harry insisted on evidence. Harry insisted on caution. Harry insisted that the killing remain controlled, contained, and invisible. Miguel didn't care about any of that. Miguel wanted results. He wanted bad people dead, and he wanted to be the one deciding who qualified as bad. For Dexter, the appeal was intoxicating. For the first time in his life, he had a friend who saw the real him, Not the lab geek mask, not the awkward boyfriend routine, not the polite co-worker persona. Miguel looked at Dexter's darkness and said, "I accept you. I understand you. Let me join you." It was the validation that Dexter had been craving since childhood, the thing Brian Moser had offered, but in a far less palatable form. Brian wanted Dexter to abandon all rules and embrace pure chaos. Miguel wanted them to work together within a framework, targeting people who deserved it, making the world better through violence. Dexter began teaching Miguel the basics of the code: how to stalk a target, how to confirm guilt, how to plan a kill. And for a stretch of the season, it seemed to be working. They hunted together. They killed together. They shared something that Dexter had never shared with anyone. And Dexter was, for the first time, genuinely happy. But the partnership was rotting from the inside. Miguel's moral compass was never as steady as he pretended it to be. Behind the charming smile and the passionate speeches about justice, Miguel was a man driven by ego, ambition, and a volatile temper. The show dropped hints early on. There was a scene where Miguel and his wife Sylvia were having dinner with Dexter and Rita, and Sylvia dropped a glass. Miguel's reaction was immediate and frightening, a flash of rage that he barely controlled. It was the kind of anger that doesn't come from a broken glass. It comes from somewhere deep and permanent. As the season progressed, Miguel began drifting from the code. He started choosing targets based on personal grudges rather than confirmed guilt. And then he crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Miguel killed Ellen Wolf, a defense attorney who had been a thorn in his side professionally. Ellen wasn't a killer. She wasn't a criminal. She was a lawyer doing her job, defending clients that Miguel wanted to see punished. And Miguel murdered her. When Dexter discovered what Miguel had done, the entire dynamic of the season shifted. The friend became the enemy. The partner became the threat. And Dexter realized something that would haunt him for the rest of the series. He couldn't share his darkness with anyone, not because people would reject him, but because people would be corrupted by it. Brian wanted Dexter to abandon control. Miguel used Dexter's methods for personal vengeance. In both cases, the result was the same. Innocent people died. Dexter confronted Miguel. Their friendship collapsed spectacularly, with Miguel accusing Dexter of hypocrisy and Dexter recognizing that Miguel had been manipulating him from the very beginning. The charming camaraderie, the late-night conversations, the shared kills, all of it had been a long con. Miguel didn't want a partner. He wanted a weapon, someone who could teach him to kill cleanly and help him eliminate his enemies without getting caught. Dexter killed Miguel Prado and framed George King, the season's other villain known as the Skinner, for the murder. The official record would show that Miguel was a victim, not a perpetrator. The partnership was erased as cleanly as one of Dexter's crime scenes. Season 3's twist wasn't a single shocking moment like Brian's reveal or the discovery of the body dump. It was a slow, grinding betrayal that played out over the entire season. The twist was trust itself. Dexter trusted someone. He opened up, he let someone in, and that person used his vulnerability against him. This had massive implications for the rest of the series. After Miguel, Dexter pulled back. He became even more guarded, even more isolated. The brief window of connection slammed shut, and the lesson was brutal. For someone like Dexter, friendship isn't just difficult, it's dangerous. Not because people won't accept him, but because acceptance itself is the trap. The moment someone knows your secret, they have power over you. And power, in the Dexter universe, always corrupts. Season 3 also featured significant developments in Dexter's personal life. Rita became pregnant, and Dexter proposed marriage. The engagement and the pregnancy were supposed to represent growth, a step toward the normal life that the code demanded Dexter maintain. But after what happened with Miguel, the irony was thick. Dexter was building a family at the same time he was learning that human connection could be weaponized against him. He was planning a wedding while burying a friend he had been forced to murder. The season ended with Dexter getting married, with a subplot involving the Skinner kidnapping Dexter right before the ceremony. He escaped, killed the Skinner, and made it to his own wedding on time, arriving with a smile and a tuxedo as if nothing had happened. It was classic Dexter. The monster wearing the mask of a man, standing at the altar, saying his vows, while the blood of his latest victim was still metaphorically on his hands. But the marriage wasn't a happy ending. It was the setup for the biggest, most devastating twist the show had ever attempted. Because Season 4 was coming, and Season 4 would introduce a villain who wasn't just dangerous. He was everything Dexter wanted to be, a serial killer with a family, a monster who had figured out the one thing Dexter couldn't, how to have it all. His name was Arthur Mitchell. The world knew him as the Trinity Killer. And by the time the season was over, Dexter would have killed him. But Arthur would have the last word, and that last word would change everything. Season 4 of Dexter is widely considered the best season of the entire franchise, and it is built almost entirely on the shoulders of one performance. John Lithgow plays Arthur Mitchell, a serial killer known as the Trinity Killer, and his portrayal is so unsettling, so layered, and so disturbingly human that it earned him the Emmy Award for Outstanding Guest Actor in a Drama Series in 2010. It remains one of the most celebrated villain performances in television history. Arthur Mitchell doesn't look like a monster. That's the first thing you notice about him. He's an older man, soft-spoken, with a gentle smile and an almost fatherly warmth. He volunteers for a charity called 4 Walls, 1 Heart that builds houses for families in need. He goes to church. He has a wife named Sally, a son named Jonah, and a daughter named Rebecca. He is, by every outward measure, a pillar of his community, the kind of man people look up to, the kind of man people trust their children around. But Arthur Mitchell has been killing for over 30 years. His pattern was methodical and ritualistic. He killed in cycles of 3, or so the police believed. First, he would abduct a young woman and drown her in a bathtub full of her own blood. Then he would force a man to jump to his death from a building. Then he would bludgeon someone to death with a hammer. 3 kills, then silence. He would disappear for a while, move to a new city, volunteer again, build houses again, smile again. And then the cycle would start over. Miami Metro had been tracking the Trinity pattern for years, led by the now retired FBI agent Frank Lundy, who came out of retirement specifically to pursue this case. Lundy's return created complications for Deborah, who had a romantic history with him, and for the entire homicide division, which was already stretched thin. But it was Dexter who made the real connection, because when Dexter began researching Arthur Mitchell, he didn't just see a target. He saw a mirror. Arthur had managed what Dexter believed to be impossible. He was a serial killer with a family. He had a wife who loved him, children who depended on him, a house full of holiday decorations and family photos. He had been killing for 3 decades and nobody suspected a thing. Not his neighbors, not his colleagues, not even his own wife. Arthur had figured out the puzzle that Dexter was still trying to solve. How to be a monster and a man at the same time. Dexter was fascinated. He started following Arthur, studying his methods, watching how he interacted with his family. And then Dexter did something reckless. He inserted himself directly into Arthur's life using the alias Kyle Butler. He joined 4 Walls, 1 Heart. He showed up at charity builds. He sat across from Arthur at meetings and shook his hand and looked into the eyes of a man who had killed dozens of people and saw someone who seemed, at least on the surface, to have everything Dexter wanted. But the more Dexter learned about Arthur Mitchell, the more the illusion cracked. Arthur's family life wasn't what it appeared to be. His wife Sally lived in constant fear. She flinched when he raised his voice. She handed over her jewelry when he demanded it. She apologized for things that didn't warrant apology, the small, compulsive apologies of a woman who had learned through years of abuse that anything could trigger a violent reaction. His son Jonah was terrified of him. His daughter Rebecca was trapped. The family that looked so perfect from the outside was a prison on the inside. Arthur didn't maintain a family because he loved them. He maintained a family because they were part of the ritual, part of the cycle. They were props in the performance of normalcy, and any deviation from the script was met with rage. This realization was devastating for Dexter. He had looked at Arthur and seen hope. Now he looked at Arthur and saw a warning. The serial killer with a family hadn't solved the puzzle. He had turned his family into victims. And if Dexter continued down this path, he risked doing the same thing to Rita and the children. Meanwhile, the investigation into the Trinity Killer was accelerating. Frank Lundy and Deborah were working the case together, their professional relationship complicated by unresolved romantic feelings. And then, in one of the season's most shocking twists, Lundy was shot and killed. Deborah was standing right next to him. She was shot too, but survived. The initial assumption was that the Trinity Killer had targeted Lundy to protect his identity, but the truth was stranger and sadder. The shooter wasn't Arthur Mitchell, it was Christine Hill, a reporter who had been dating Detective Joey Quinn. Christine was Arthur's daughter from a previous relationship. She had grown up separated from her father but was still desperate for his approval. She killed Lundy to protect Arthur, to prove her loyalty, to earn the love of a man who was incapable of giving it. The reveal that Christine was Arthur's daughter reframed every scene she had appeared in. Her relationship with Quinn, her access to police information, her obsessive interest in the Trinity case. All of it had been motivated by a child's pathetic, doomed desire to be seen by a father who viewed her as a tool. Christine eventually took her own life when the truth came out, and her death became another casualty in the long list of people destroyed by Arthur Mitchell's existence. Not just his direct victims, but the people around him, his wife, his children, his estranged daughter, and eventually Dexter's wife. The final episodes of Season 4 are a masterclass in escalating tension. The police were closing in on Arthur through the 4 Walls, 1 Heart database. Angel Batista's team discovered something that expanded the Trinity kill cycle. It wasn't 3 kills per cycle, it was 4. Before each cycle of drowning, jumping, and bludgeoning, Arthur kidnapped a 10-year-old boy. The boy was kept for a few days and then buried alive. This new information made Arthur even more terrifying. He wasn't just a serial killer. He was a predator of children, hiding that aspect of his pattern beneath the more visible murders. But the clock was also ticking for Dexter. Arthur discovered that Kyle Butler was not who he claimed to be. He looked up the name Dexter Morgan in the phone book. He broke into what he thought was Dexter's apartment, which turned out to be Deborah's. He was enraged, screaming, and throwing things when he realized he had been deceived. Arthur Mitchell knew Dexter's real name. He knew where his family lived, and Dexter knew that Arthur knew. The Season 4 finale, titled The Getaway and directed by Steve Schill, who won the Emmy for Outstanding Directing for this episode, brought everything to a head. Dexter captured Arthur Mitchell. He brought him to a kill room, confronted him one final time, and killed him. Arthur's last words before Dexter plunged the knife into his chest have become legendary in the show's mythology. Arthur looked at Dexter and simply said, "It's already over." Dexter didn't understand what that meant. Not yet. He killed Arthur. He disposed of the body. He believed he had won. The monster was dead. His family was safe. He called Rita to tell her he was coming home. She didn't answer. He drove home. He let himself into the house. Everything was quiet. Harrison should have been crying or babbling. Rita should have been in the kitchen or the bedroom. But the house was still. And then he walked into the bathroom. Rita was lying in the bathtub, dead. A single cut to her femoral artery had caused her to bleed out. The water had turned red. Blood had pooled on the floor, and sitting in that blood, reaching up toward Dexter with tiny hands, was baby Harrison. Arthur Mitchell had killed Rita before Dexter killed Arthur. The words, "It's already over," were Arthur's final act of cruelty. He knew that Dexter would find her. He knew that Dexter's son would be sitting in the blood, the same way Dexter had sat in his mother's blood as a child. The cycle was repeating. The sins of the father were being visited upon the son. And there was nothing Dexter could do about it. It was already done. The image of Harrison in that blood became the defining image of the entire series. It was a mirror of Dexter's own origin, the shipping container, the blood. The child too young to understand what had happened, but old enough to be permanently marked by it. Harry Morgan had pulled little Dexter out of Laura Moser's blood and spent the rest of his life trying to manage the damage. Now Dexter was pulling his own son out of Rita's blood, and the implication was clear. Harrison was going to be like his father. The darkness would pass from one generation to the next, no matter how hard anyone tried to stop it. Rita's death changed everything about the show. Dexter was now a single father. The pretense of a normal suburban life was gone. The woman who had been his anchor to humanity, the person who made him believe he could be something more than a predator, was dead because he had been too slow, too distracted, too focused on his own hunt to protect her. And the darkest part of all was the irony. Dexter had spent the entire season studying Arthur Mitchell, admiring his ability to maintain a family while being a killer. And in the end, it was Arthur who proved that the two things could not coexist. Arthur's family was a prison, and Dexter's family paid the ultimate price for Dexter's delusion that he could have both. Season 4 is the reason people still talk about Dexter 20 years later. It is the reason the show endures. It is the season that proved this wasn't just a clever procedural about a serial killer with a conscience. It was a tragedy, and the bill was coming due. The show would continue for 4 more seasons after Rita's death. Some of those seasons were brilliant, some were deeply flawed. But none of them ever fully recovered the magic of Season 4, because Season 4 was the season where Dexter lost the one thing that made his story hopeful, the possibility that he could be saved. After Rita, there was no more hope. There was only damage control. And the question shifted from, can Dexter be a normal person, to something much darker. How much more destruction will Dexter cause before this is over? The answer, as it turned out, was a lot, because the people closest to Dexter were about to start discovering his secret. And the first one to find out, the one whose discovery would set off a chain reaction that destroyed everything, was the person who loved him most, his sister, Deborah. Before we get to the moment Deborah walks into that church and sees her brother for what he truly is, we need to talk about Season 5 and Season 6, because both of them contain twists that set the stage for that devastating discovery. Season 5 begins in the immediate aftermath of Rita's murder. Dexter is a wreck. For the first time in the series, he isn't calculating or composed. He is grieving, genuinely, messily, humanly grieving. He struggles to care for his children. He goes through the motions at work. And in one of the most telling scenes of the season, he kills a random man in a bathroom, not because the man fit the code, but because Dexter was in pain and didn't know what else to do with it. It was the first time the audience saw Dexter kill out of pure emotion rather than ritual, and it signaled that the tightly controlled system Harry had built was starting to crack. The main storyline of Season 5 revolves around Lumen Pierce, played by Julia Stiles, a woman Dexter discovers among the victims of a ring of violent criminals who kidnapped, raped, and murdered women. Lumen is a survivor, but barely. She is traumatized, furious, and desperate for revenge against the men who destroyed her life. Dexter, recognizing something of himself in her pain, decides to help her. Together, they track down and kill each member of the ring, one by one. The Dexter-Lumen partnership was different from the Dexter-Miguel partnership. Miguel wanted power. Lumen wanted closure. She wasn't interested in becoming a serial killer. She didn't want to adopt the code or join Dexter on future hunts. She wanted to face the specific men who had hurt her, see the life leave their eyes, and then be done with it. And that's exactly what happened. After the last member of the ring was killed, Lumen told Dexter that her dark passenger was gone. The rage that had driven her had burned itself out. She left Miami peacefully, and Dexter let her go. This was a twist in the emotional sense rather than the plot sense. For the first time, someone had shared Dexter's darkness and walked away clean. Lumen proved that the killing impulse could be temporary, that trauma could drive someone to violence, and that the violence could have an endpoint. But Dexter couldn't follow her example. His dark passenger wasn't tied to a single traumatic event. It was woven into his identity. Lumen could heal. Dexter could not. Season 5 also featured a significant subplot involving a corrupt cop named Stan Liddy, played by Peter Weller, who was hired by Joey Quinn to investigate Dexter. Liddy discovered that Dexter was involved in criminal activity and tried to use the information for personal gain. Dexter killed him. Another person who got too close to the truth. Another body added to the count. Another reminder that Dexter's secret was a gravitational field that pulled everyone nearby toward destruction. But the real setup for what was coming happened in the background of Season 5. Deborah, who had been promoted within the department, was getting closer and closer to the vigilante killers without knowing one of them was her brother. In the season finale, Deborah walked into the room where Dexter and Lumen had just killed their final target. She saw 2 people in masks standing over a dead body. She didn't see their faces. She let them go, believing that whoever these vigilantes were, they were doing the right thing. Deborah, the cop, the law and order Morgan, chose to look the other way. This moment planted a seed that wouldn't fully bloom until the end of Season 6, but it was crucial. Deborah was already making moral compromises without knowing it. She was already sliding toward a gray area that the old Deborah, the Season 1 Deborah, would have been horrified by. And the closer she got to that gray area, the closer she got to the truth about Dexter. Season 6 introduced a pair of villains that functioned as a dark mirror of the Dexter-Harry dynamic. Travis Marshall, played by Colin Hanks, was a young man who appeared to be under the influence of his former professor, James Geller, played by Edward James Olmos. Together, they were staging elaborate, religiously themed murder tableau based on the Book of Revelation. Bodies posed as angels, crime scenes designed to look like biblical prophecies. The media dubbed the killer the Doomsday Killer, and Miami Metro threw everything they had at the case. The twist of Season 6 was that Professor Geller was dead. He had been dead the entire time. Travis had killed him years earlier and stored his body in a freezer. Every scene in which Geller appeared, every conversation, every argument, every moment where Geller seemed to be directing Travis's actions was a hallucination. Travis was talking to himself. He was the sole killer. Geller was a ghost in his mind, a projection of authority and permission, giving Travis the illusion that someone else was responsible for the horror he was creating. When Dexter discovered Geller's frozen corpse, the realization hit hard. Not just because the investigation had been pursuing the wrong man, but because Dexter recognized what was happening. Travis had a voice in his head telling him what to do. Dexter had a voice in his head telling him what to do. Harry Morgan, Dexter's adoptive father, had been appearing to Dexter as a hallucination since Season 1, offering advice, debating morality, reminding Dexter of the code. The parallel was uncomfortable. Was Harry any more real than Geller? Was Dexter any more sane than Travis? The show had always treated Harry's appearances as a narrative device, a way for Dexter to externalize his internal conflict. But the Geller twist forced the audience to reconsider. If Travis could hallucinate a dead mentor who guided his killing, what did that say about Dexter's relationship with his dead father? The line between psychological coping mechanism and outright delusion was thinner than anyone wanted to admit. But the Geller twist, as significant as it was, is not what people remember about Season 6. What people remember is the final scene of the season finale. Deborah had been going through a difficult period. Her therapist had been pushing her to examine her feelings about Dexter more honestly, and what emerged was complicated and uncomfortable. There was a brief, controversial subplot in which Deborah began to realize she might have romantic feelings for her adoptive brother, a storyline that most fans and critics agreed was unnecessary and poorly handled. But beneath the awkwardness, the therapist was drilling toward something real. Deborah's entire emotional world revolved around Dexter. He was her anchor, her constant, the one person she trusted absolutely. And that trust was about to be obliterated. In the final moments of the Season 6 finale, Deborah went to a church where Travis Marshall was preparing to complete his final doomsday tableau. She entered through a back door. She walked through a hallway. She turned a corner, and she saw her brother. Dexter was standing over Travis Marshall's body. He had just killed him. The knife was in his hand. The plastic wrap was on the altar. The kill room was set up exactly the way Dexter always set up his kill rooms, meticulous, ritualistic, and undeniable. Deborah froze. Her face went through every possible emotion in a span of seconds: confusion, denial, horror, recognition, and then nothing. Just a blank, empty stare as the reality of what she was seeing rearranged everything she had ever believed about her brother. This was the twist the show had been building toward since the very first episode. For 6 seasons, Dexter's greatest fear had been discovery. For 6 seasons, the audience had wondered what would happen if someone who truly loved Dexter found out what he was. Not a rival killer like Brian, not a suspicious cop like Dokes, not a manipulative friend like Miguel, but someone who loved him unconditionally, someone whose opinion actually mattered to him. That someone was Deborah. And now she knew. Season 7 dealt with the fallout, and it was some of the best material the show had produced since Season 4. Deborah's initial reaction was denial. She tried to convince herself that what she saw was an isolated incident, that Dexter had killed Travis in a moment of rage, and it didn't represent a pattern. Dexter encouraged this interpretation, hoping that if he could contain the revelation, he could maintain the status quo. But Deborah was a detective, a good one. And once she started looking, she couldn't stop. She found the blood slides Dexter kept as trophies. She connected him to other killings. She started unraveling the thread, and each tug brought more horror. Dexter wasn't just a man who had killed once. He was a serial killer. He had been killing for his entire adult life. The brother she had loved and trusted and defended was a monster, and he had been one the entire time she knew him. What followed was one of the most complex relationship dynamics in television history. Deborah didn't turn Dexter in. She couldn't. The codependency was too deep, the love was too entangled, the fear of losing the only family she had left was too overwhelming. Instead, she tried to manage him. She tried to control his behavior. She tried to become his handler, the way Harry had been, setting boundaries and demanding compliance. But Deborah wasn't Harry. She didn't have Harry's clinical detachment or his decades of preparation. She was a woman in crisis, drowning in a secret that was destroying her from the inside out. Meanwhile, Season 7 introduced two major threats. The first was Isaac Serko, played by Ray Stevenson, a Ukrainian mob boss who came to Miami seeking revenge for the death of his lover Victor, whom Dexter had killed. Isaac was one of the most compelling antagonists in the series because he wasn't motivated by ideology or insanity. He was motivated by grief. He loved someone, that person was taken from him, and he would burn the world down to avenge them. In another context, he could have been the hero of his own story. The second threat was Hannah McKay, played by Yvonne Strahovski, a woman with her own history of killing who became Dexter's love interest. Hannah complicated everything because she represented something Dexter had never had with anyone else. A romantic partner who knew exactly what he was and loved him anyway. Unlike Rita, who loved the mask, Hannah loved the real Dexter. And that was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. But the most devastating twist of Season 7 belonged to Deborah and to the woman who had been pursuing Dexter's secret from the other side. Captain Maria Laguerta, who had never accepted that James Dokes was the Bay Harbor butcher, had been quietly investigating the closed case for years. In Season 7, her investigation accelerated. She found evidence connecting Dexter to the butcher killings. She built a case. And in the season finale, she confronted Dexter and Deborah in a shipping container, the same kind of place where Dexter's story began. Laguerta had enough evidence to arrest Dexter. She had enough to reopen the case and clear Dokes' name. She was doing the right thing. She was being a good cop. And Deborah knew it. What happened next is still one of the most debated moments in the entire franchise. Deborah Morgan, the woman who had dedicated her life to law enforcement, who had built her identity around being a good cop, pulled out her gun and shot Maria Laguerta. She killed her, an innocent woman, a colleague, a friend, not to save herself, but to protect Dexter. This was the moment Deborah crossed a line she could never come back from. Everything before this could theoretically be rationalized, looking the other way for the vigilantes in Season 5. Helping Dexter cover his tracks in Season 7, those were compromises, ugly ones, but compromises nonetheless. Killing Laguerta was murder. It was the act of someone who had been so thoroughly consumed by Dexter's gravity that she was willing to sacrifice her own soul to keep him safe. The Season 7 finale, titled Surprise Motherfucker, ended with Deborah collapsing into Dexter's arms, sobbing over Laguerta's body, having just committed the act that would define and ultimately destroy her. She had protected her brother, and in doing so, she had become everything she despised. From this point forward, the show became a countdown to catastrophe. The question was no longer whether Dexter would be discovered. It was how much damage he would cause before the end. And the answer, as the final season would prove, was more than anyone expected. Season 8 of Dexter was the final season of the original series, and it arrived carrying the weight of 7 years of accumulated storylines, unresolved questions, and sky-high expectations. Fans wanted a satisfying conclusion. They wanted answers. They wanted Dexter Morgan to face some form of reckoning for the hundreds of people he had killed and the countless lives he had ruined. What they got instead became one of the most controversial final seasons in television history. The season opens with a new character who rewrites the mythology of the entire show. Dr. Evelyn Vogel, played by Charlotte Rampling, arrives in Miami and introduces herself to Dexter with a claim that changes everything. She tells him that she was the person who helped Harry Morgan create the code. Let that settle for a moment. For 7 seasons, the Code of Harry had been the foundational framework of Dexter's existence. It It was presented as the creation of a desperate father trying to protect his son and society from a boy he recognized as dangerous. Harry was a cop who loved Dexter, but understood that love alone could not suppress homicidal urges. So he built a system, rules, guidelines, a moral scaffolding that would channel Dexter's violence into something productive, or at least less destructive. But Vogel's arrival reframed that origin story entirely. Harry didn't create the code alone. He consulted a neuropsychiatrist, a woman who specialized in studying psychopaths, a woman who had been fascinated by Dexter as a child and saw in him a unique opportunity for research. The code wasn't just a father's love letter to a damaged son. It was a clinical intervention designed by a scientist, refined through sessions and observations, and implemented by Harry as a kind of behavioral modification program. This twist had profound implications. It meant that Dexter's entire moral framework was, at least in part, a therapeutic experiment. It meant that the code wasn't born purely from love. It was born from a collaboration between a grieving father and an academic who viewed Dexter as a case study. And it raised uncomfortable questions about whether the code actually worked or whether it was simply a more sophisticated cage. Vogel positioned herself as a maternal figure in Dexter's life, someone who understood him on a level that even Harry hadn't. She had studied psychopathy for decades. She had written papers about it. She believed that psychopaths like Dexter were a necessary part of the human ecosystem, that their lack of emotion and their willingness to do what others couldn't was, in its own way, a form of perfection. She told Dexter that he was perfect. Not broken, not damaged, perfect. This was seductive and dangerous. Vogel was offering Dexter something he had craved his entire life. Not acceptance of his darkness, which Brian and Miguel had both offered in corrupted forms, but validation of it. Vogel wasn't saying, "I accept you despite what you are." She was saying, "What you are is exactly right." But Vogel had her own secrets. She had a son, Oliver Saxon, also known as Daniel Vogel, who had been institutionalized as a child after showing extreme violent tendencies. When Saxon was young, he had killed his own brother, Vogel's other son. Vogel had committed him to a facility, essentially abandoning him the way Harry had abandoned Brian Moser. And just like Brian, Saxon came back. Saxon became the primary antagonist of Season 8, known as the Brain Surgeon because he removed pieces of his victims' brains as trophies. He was a psychopath without a code, without restraint, and without the clinical distance that Vogel had given Dexter. He was what Dexter could have been if Harry and Vogel had never intervened, and he was furious at his mother for choosing Dexter over him. The conflict between Dexter and Saxon built across the season, but it was the relationship between Vogel and her two sons that drove the emotional stakes. Vogel had, in different ways, created both of them. She had helped build the code that shaped Dexter, and she had failed Saxon so completely that he became a monster with no guardrails. When Saxon discovered that Vogel was trying to reconnect with him while simultaneously working with Dexter, he felt betrayed all over again. In one of the season's most devastating scenes, Saxon came to Vogel's house while she was on the phone with Dexter. He stood behind her, his face visible through the window, and looked directly at Dexter across the distance. Then he pulled a knife and slit his mother's throat. As Dexter broke down the door and rushed to her side, Vogel bled out in his arms. Saxon's words before the kill were chilling. He told Dexter that mother chose the wrong son again. Vogel's death removed the last person who understood Dexter's origins. Harry was dead, Brian was dead, and now Vogel was dead. The three people who had been most intimately involved in creating and understanding Dexter Morgan were all gone. He was alone with his code, and no one left to interpret it for him. Meanwhile, Dexter had been planning an escape. He and Hannah McKay, who was now a fugitive with a warrant for her arrest, had been preparing to flee to Argentina with Harrison. They would start over, new names, new lives, new identities. It was the fantasy Dexter had been chasing for 8 seasons. A clean slate, a chance to be normal, or at least a convincing imitation of normal. But then Saxon shot Deborah. The circumstances were almost cruelly mundane. Deborah, who had been struggling with the psychological aftermath of killing Lagerta, who had developed a drinking problem, who had left and then returned to the police force, was tracking Saxon as part of the ongoing investigation. She found him, he shot her in the abdomen, She survived the initial injury and was rushed to the hospital. For a few hours, it seemed like Deborah would pull through. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. Quinn visited her. Dexter visited her. She told Dexter to go, to get on the plane with Hannah and Harrison and start his new life. She said she would see him soon. But Deborah didn't recover. After initially successful surgery, she suffered a massive stroke caused by a blood clot that had formed during the procedure. The stroke left her brain dead. She was alive in the biological sense, her heart still beating, her lungs still filling with air. But the Deborah Morgan, who had been Dexter's sister, his conscience, his harshest critic, and his most loyal defender, was gone. Dexter went to the hospital. He stood over her bed, and in a scene that divided the fan base more than perhaps any other in the series, he disconnected her from life support. He carried her body out of the hospital, past nurses and security and other patients, and loaded her onto his boat. Then he drove out into the Atlantic as Hurricane Laura bore down on the coast. He buried Deborah at sea the same way he had buried his victims. He dropped her body into the water and watched it sink. And then he turned his boat directly into the storm. The implication was clear. Dexter was killing himself. He was going down with the hurricane, paying for his sins with his own life, ending the cycle of destruction that had consumed everyone he loved. Rita was dead because of him. Dokes was dead because of him. LaGuerta was dead because of him. Lumen was traumatized because of him. And now Deborah, the person who meant more to him than anyone, was dead because of him. Driving into the hurricane was the only appropriate ending. The monster destroys himself before he can destroy anyone else. But that's not what happened. The final shot of the original series showed Dexter alive. He was somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, possibly Oregon, working as a lumberjack in a remote logging community. He had a beard, his eyes were empty. He sat alone in a Spartan cabin and stared directly into the camera, breaking the fourth wall for the first and only time in the series. And then the screen went black. The reaction was volcanic. Fans were furious, critics were baffled. The lumberjack ending became a cultural punchline, referenced and mocked in articles, podcasts, and social media posts for years afterward. The general consensus was that the show had betrayed its own premise. Dexter Morgan should have faced consequences. He should have been caught or killed or forced to confront the full weight of what he had done. Instead, he faked his death and went to cut down trees. The Rotten Tomatoes score for Season 8 sits at 35%. The series finale, titled Remember the Monsters, holds an IMDb rating in the 4.6 to 4.9 range, making it one of the lowest-rated finales of any prestige drama. But here's the thing. The original series ended in 2013, and the Dexter franchise didn't stay dead, because 8 years later, Showtime announced a revival. A limited series that would give the character another chance at an ending, a chance to get it right. It was called Dexter New Blood. And it would force Dexter to face the one consequence he had been running from his entire life. His son. Dexter New Blood premiered on November 7th, 2021. Roughly 8 years after the original series finale that had left such a bitter taste. It consisted of 10 episodes and was developed by Clyde Phillips, the showrunner who had guided the first 4 seasons of the original series, the seasons universally regarded as the show's creative peak. Phillips had left after Season 4, and many fans attributed the declining quality of Seasons 5 through 8 to his absence. His return for New Blood was interpreted as a promise. This time, they would get it right. This time, Dexter would face real consequences. The premise was both simple and elegant. Dexter Morgan was alive. He had survived the hurricane. He had not, as many fans had speculated, been living as a lumberjack out of guilt or penance. He had simply been hiding. He had relocated to a small town called Iron Lake in upstate New York, adopted the alias Jim Lindsay, and built a quiet, unremarkable life for himself. He worked at a local sporting goods store. He dated the town's chief of police, a woman named Angela Bishop, played by Julia Jones. He was friendly with the local residents. He shoveled his neighbors' driveways. He brought coffee to the police station. He was, once again, performing normalcy. But the key detail of New Blood's setup was this. Dexter had stopped killing. For roughly 10 years, he had suppressed his dark passenger. The urges were still there, simmering beneath the surface, manifesting as hallucinations of Deborah instead of Harry. But Dexter hadn't acted on them. He hadn't built a kill room. He hadn't stalked a target. He hadn't drawn blood. For the first time in his adult life, Dexter Morgan was clean. This was a radical departure from the original series. The old Dexter couldn't go more than a few episodes without killing someone. The idea that he had maintained control for a decade suggested real change, real growth, a genuine evolution of the character. But as the audience learned quickly, suppression is not the same as transformation. The dark passenger wasn't gone, it was dormant, and all it needed was the right trigger to wake up. That trigger arrived in the form of two people who entered Dexter's life almost simultaneously. The first was Matt Caldwell, the entitled reckless son of a local businessman named Kurt Caldwell, played by Clancy Brown. Matt was a privileged brat who had killed someone in a boating accident and gotten away with it thanks to his father's money and influence. When Matt showed up in Iron Lake and shot a beloved white deer that the community considered sacred, Dexter's instincts roared back to life. Here was a man who had killed and escaped justice. Here was a target who fit the code. And Dexter, after 10 years of restraint, snapped. He killed Matt Caldwell. It was messy and impulsive, nothing like the clinical precision of the old Dexter. But the feeling was the same, the relief, the satisfaction, the sense that something had been set right in a world that was fundamentally unjust. Dexter dismembered the body and hid it under a fire pit on his property. And just like that, a decade of sobriety was over. The second person who arrived in Iron Lake was Harrison Morgan, Dexter's son. The baby who had sat in Rita's blood was now a teenager, played by Jack Alcott. He had tracked Dexter down. He had traveled across the country to find the father who had abandoned him. And he showed up on Dexter's doorstep with a backpack and 1,000 questions. Harrison's arrival transformed the entire dynamic of the show. This wasn't just a sequel about Dexter killing again. It was a story about inheritance, about what parents passed to their children, about whether the darkness that defined Dexter was genetic, environmental, or something else entirely. Harrison had been born in blood. Just like his father, he had experienced trauma at an age when the brain is most vulnerable to permanent damage. And as the season progressed, it became clear that Harrison was not a normal teenager. He had violent impulses. He fantasized about hurting people. He deliberately broke an opponent's arm during a wrestling match. He admitted to Dexter that he thought about hurting everyone all the time. He had set up a classmate named Ethan, orchestrating a scenario where Ethan appeared to be the aggressor so that Harrison could hurt him and claim self-defense. Harrison was, in other words, showing all the early signs that Dexter had shown as a child. The dark passenger was hereditary. Dexter saw this and was torn. Part of him was horrified. He had abandoned Harrison specifically to prevent this, to keep the darkness from spreading to the next generation, leaving his son behind, faking his death, disappearing into anonymity. All of it was supposed to protect Harrison, and it had failed. The darkness found its way through anyway. But another part of Dexter was something he probably couldn't have articulated. He was relieved, because for the first time since Brian Moser, someone understood him. His son understood him. And the temptation to bring Harrison into his world, to teach him the code, to do for Harrison what Harry had done for him was overwhelming. Meanwhile, the show's other major storyline involved Kurt Caldwell, Matt's father. Kurt was a local hero, a self-made businessman who employed half the town and contributed generously to the community. He was also a serial killer who had been murdering young women for over 25 years. He picked up runaways and drifters, brought them to a cabin in the woods, gave them food and shelter, and then hunted them. He shot them in the back with a rifle as they tried to run, and then preserved their bodies in an underground bunker, posed like trophies. When Dexter and Harrison discovered Kurt's hidden chamber, they found 30 victims perfectly preserved, arranged in display cases like a macabre museum. Dexter and Harrison killed Kurt together. It was the culmination of the father-son dynamic that had been building all season. Harrison watched as Dexter prepared the kill room. He stood by as Dexter confronted Kurt with the evidence of his crimes. And when Dexter drove the knife into Kurt's chest, Harrison was there, witnessing the full reality of who his father was. But the kill created a complication that would prove fatal. Kurt had sent an anonymous letter to Angela Bishop, identifying Jim Lindsay as Matt Caldwell's killer, along with physical evidence, a titanium screw from Matt's surgically repaired body. Angela had already been developing suspicions about her boyfriend. She had discovered that Jim Lindsay's real name was Dexter Morgan. She had connected him to the Bay Harbor butcher case through ketamine injection marks that matched the method described in a true crime podcast about the original investigation. And now she had physical evidence tying him to Matt's murder. Angela arrested Dexter. She brought him into the police station, fingerprinted him under his real name, and conducted an interrogation that was both professional and deeply personal. This was the woman who had shared his bed, introduced him to her daughter, trusted him with her life. And now she was sitting across a table from him, learning that everything about their relationship had been a lie. Dexter tried to manipulate his way out. He told Angela about Kurt's trophy room, hoping that exposing a bigger monster would give her reason to let the smaller monster go. Angela checked. She found the bodies. She confirmed everything Dexter said. But it didn't matter. She was not going to look the other way. Then things went wrong very quickly. Angela told Dexter that Angel Batista, the former detective from Miami Metro, was coming to Iron Lake. They were going to extradite Dexter to Florida, where the death penalty was on the table. Dexter realized he was out of options. He called out to Sergeant Logan, the friendly local cop who had coached Harrison's wrestling team and who had been nothing but kind to the entire family. Logan brought Dexter water. Dexter reached through the cell bars, grabbed him, and slammed his face against the metal. Logan struggled. He tried to draw his weapon. He fired a shot that missed, and Dexter snapped his neck. Logan was innocent, completely, unambiguously innocent. He was a good man, a good cop, a good person. He had done nothing wrong. And Dexter killed him without hesitation because Logan was between him and the exit. It was the most damning kill in the entire franchise. Not because it was the most violent or the most dramatic, but because it was the most unnecessary. Dexter didn't need to kill Logan. He chose to. And in doing so, he proved once and for all that the code was a fiction. When it came down to survival or morality, Dexter would choose survival every single time. He escaped the station. He called Harrison from Logan's phone. He told his son to meet him at a specific location so they could run together, start over somewhere new, disappear into anonymity the way Dexter had done before. Harrison came, but when he saw the blood on Dexter's hands and learned that Dexter had killed Logan, something shifted. Harrison had believed his father was a righteous killer, a man who only took the lives of those who deserved it, a vigilante with a code. Logan didn't deserve it. Logan was a friend. Logan had been kind to Harrison personally. Harrison told Dexter to turn himself in. Dexter refused. He made the case for running, for survival, for the two of them against the world. But Harrison wouldn't budge. He looked at his father and said there was no other way. Dexter, in what may have been his first truly selfless act, or perhaps just his final manipulation, handed Harrison a rifle. He told Harrison to do what he needed to do. And Harrison, the boy born in blood, the son of the Bay Harbor butcher, raised the weapon and shot his father. Dexter fell. Angela arrived at the scene. She found Dexter on the ground, bleeding. Harrison stood over him with the rifle. And the show ended. Or at least, it was supposed to end. Dexter New Blood became the most watched series in Showtime's history, drawing 8 million viewers per week across all platforms. It had delivered on the promise of consequences. Dexter had finally been held accountable, not by the law, not by another killer, but by his own son. The cycle of violence that began in a shipping container had been broken by the one person who had the most reason to continue it. But television is a business, and Dexter Morgan was too valuable a character to stay dead. Because as it turned out, the gunshot didn't kill him. In July of 2024, at San Diego Comic-Con, Showtime made an announcement that sent shockwaves through the Dexter fan community. They weren't just reviving the franchise, they were expanding it in two directions simultaneously. A prequel series called Dexter Original Sin would explore the early years of Dexter's killing career. And a sequel series called Dexter Resurrection would reveal that Dexter Morgan survived the gunshot wound inflicted by his son Harrison at the end of New Blood. That last detail was the real bombshell. The entire emotional weight of New Blood's finale rested on the idea that Dexter was dead, that the cycle had ended, that Harrison had made the impossible choice to kill his own father in order to break the chain of violence that had defined their family for generations. Learning that Dexter survived undermined that sacrifice in the eyes of many fans. But it also opened the door to something the franchise had never fully explored. What happens to Dexter when everyone knows what he is? When there is no more mask, no more alias, no more pretending? Let's talk about Original Sin first, because even though it is a prequel, it contains one of the most surprising twists in recent Dexter history. Dexter Original Sin premiered in 2024 and ran for 10 episodes. It was set in 1991 in Miami and followed a young Dexter Morgan, played by Patrick Gibson, as he transitioned from a college student and forensic science intern to an active killer under the guidance of his adoptive father, Harry Morgan, now played by Christian Slater in a younger version of the role James Remar had originated. Michael C. Hall provided the voiceover narration, maintaining continuity with the internal monologue that had been a hallmark of the character since the original series. The prequel explored territory the original show had only hinted at through flashbacks. We saw Dexter's first documented kills, including a nurse named Mary and a man named Tony Ferrer. We saw the detailed, uncomfortable process of Harry teaching his teenage son how to identify targets, confirm guilt, set up kill rooms, and dispose of bodies. We saw the code being implemented in real time, not as an abstract set of rules, but as a hands-on, step-by-step curriculum in how to be a functional serial killer. The show also featured younger versions of familiar characters. Christina Milian played a young Maria Laguerta. James Martinez played a young Angel Batista. Molly Brown played a young Deborah Morgan. Alex Shimizu played a young Vince Masuka. Seeing these characters in their earlier forms added context to their relationships with Dexter in the original series. LaGuardia's suspicion of Dexter, which eventually led to her death in Season 7, was rooted in instincts she developed decades earlier. Batista's loyalty to Dexter, which blinded him to the truth for years, was established in their earliest interactions at Miami Metro. But the biggest twist of Original Sin came in the form of the season's main antagonist. Throughout the season, a mysterious criminal threat operated in the background, orchestrating events that complicated Dexter's early kills and threatened to expose him. The show dropped clues and misdirections, pointing the audience toward various suspects, before revealing in its final episodes that the season's big bad was someone hiding in plain sight. It was a character played by a major cast member, someone who had been positioned as an authority figure and a mentor to Dexter, someone who had been right there the entire time. According to coverage from TV Line, which ranked this reveal among the biggest television plot twists of 2025, the villain turned out to be Dexter's own boss within the forensic department. His motive was personal, rooted in the destruction of his family life, and a simmering rage that he had channeled into criminal activity while maintaining a facade of professional respectability. The reveal recontextualized the entire season, turning every scene between this character and Dexter into a potential threat that the audience and Dexter himself had completely missed. Original Sin was canceled in August of 2025, despite having previously been renewed for a second season. The cancellation was part of a broader strategic shift in the franchise's direction, consolidating resources around the sequel series that fans were most eager to see. That sequel series was Dexter Resurrection. Resurrection premiered in 2025 and picked up in the immediate aftermath of New Blood's finale. The central premise was revealed in the very first episode. Dexter Morgan did not die from Harrison's gunshot. He was found at the scene, rushed to an emergency room, and resuscitated. He survived. The implications of this were enormous. Dexter's identity was now known. Angela Bishop had arrested him as Dexter Morgan. The Bay Harbor Butcher connection had been established through Molly Park's podcast research and Angela's investigation. Angel Batista had been contacted. Sergeant Logan's body was in the police station. There was no going back to anonymity. For the first time in the franchise's history, Dexter could not hide behind a mask. Resurrection sent Dexter to New York City, where he adopted yet another alias and began searching for Harrison while navigating a dangerous new world. The show introduced a major new storyline involving a billionaire named Leon Prater, who operated a secret club of serial killers. This was a significant escalation from anything the franchise had done before. Previous seasons had pitted Dexter against individual killers or small criminal organizations. Resurrection put him in a room with multiple serial killers who were aware of each other's identities and who operated under the protection of extreme wealth. One of the most notable members of this group was the Gemini Killer, a notorious figure whose crimes had made headlines for years. Dexter, operating under a false identity within Prater's organization, began systematically eliminating the killers in the group. He took out several targets before making his move on the Gemini Killer himself. And this is where the season delivered one of its most memorable twists. After Dexter killed the man he believed to be the Gemini Killer, he was summoned by Prater for what he assumed would be a routine meeting. Instead, he was confronted by a second Gemini Killer. The Gemini was not one person, he was two. Identical twin brothers who had been operating as a single serial killer for years. Dexter had killed one twin, and the other was very much alive and very aware that someone had murdered his brother. Coverage from Cinema Blend described this as one of the most effective twists the franchise had produced in years. The Gemini twin reveal worked because it subverted the audience's assumption that killing a target meant the threat was eliminated. In Dexter's world, killing the bad guy was always the climax, the resolution, the moment of catharsis. But this time, the kill created a bigger problem instead of solving one. The surviving twin was dangerous, grieving, and motivated by the same kind of revenge that had driven Isaac Serco in Season 7. Someone killed the person he loved most, and he was going to find out who. Resurrection also brought back David Zayas as Angel Batista, now fully aware of Dexter's true nature. The dynamic between Batista and Dexter in Resurrection carried the accumulated weight of 8 original seasons and a decade-long cover-up. Batista had trusted Dexter. He had worked alongside him for years. He had considered him a friend. Learning the truth was devastating, and the show used that betrayal as a source of real emotional power. The series added Uma Thurman and Peter Dinklage to the main cast, expanding the scope of the franchise significantly. Thurman and Dinklage brought star power and dramatic gravity to their roles, and their involvement signaled that the franchise was investing heavily in Resurrection as its flagship going forward. The show was renewed for a second season in October of 2025, and its premiere set the record for Showtime's most streamed premiere on Paramount+. But beyond the new characters and the expanded mythology, Resurrection grappled with the question that had been lurking beneath the surface of the entire franchise since the very beginning. What is Dexter Morgan without the code? The code was designed for a world where Dexter was anonymous, where he could investigate targets in secret, confirm guilt through forensic evidence, and execute kills without anyone knowing he existed. That world was gone. Dexter's identity was public knowledge. His methods had been documented by podcasters and investigated by law enforcement across multiple states. The careful, methodical process that Harry and Vogel had built was no longer applicable in a world where everyone knew the monster was real. Resurrection explored what happens when a serial killer with a moral code operates in broad daylight, when the rules that kept him functional no longer apply, when the darkness that was once channeled and contained has to find a new form or consume him entirely. Dexter's relationship with Harry, which had been the emotional anchor of the original series, also evolved in Resurrection. James Remar returned as the spectral projection of Harry Morgan, but the dynamic had shifted. Harry's ghost was no longer the calm, authoritative figure from the early seasons. He was angrier, more desperate, more aware that his creation had outgrown its design. The code was failing, the monster was loose, and Harry's ghost could only watch as the consequences unfolded. The franchise, across all 4 series, had now told a story that spanned decades, from a shipping container in the early 1970s to a billionaire's secret club in 2025. From a 3-year-old boy sitting in his mother's blood to a middle-aged man running from his own son. From a code designed to contain one man's violence to a global network of killers operating in the open. And through it all, one question remained unanswered. Could Dexter Morgan ever stop? Could the dark passenger be silenced, not just suppressed? Could the cycle be broken permanently? Or was the violence as much a part of Dexter as his blood and his breath? The answer, as Resurrection continued to explore, was complicated, because Dexter Morgan kept coming back. He survived Brian Moser, he survived the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation, he survived Miguel Prado and the Trinity Killer and the Doomsday Killer and the Brain Surgeon. He survived a hurricane and a gunshot from his own son. He kept coming back, not because he was lucky, but because the darkness refused to let him go. And maybe that was the real twist all along. Not any single revelation or death or betrayal, but the slow, grinding realization that Dexter Morgan was never going to be free. The code was a leash. Code, not a cure. And the leash was getting longer with every season. Now that we've walked through every major twist in the franchise, from the ice truck killer reveal in Season 1 all the way through Dexter Resurrection's Gemini twin surprise, let's step back and look at the bigger picture. Because when you lay all of these twists side by side, a pattern emerges. A repeating structure that the show used across every season, every villain, every heartbreak. And understanding that pattern tells you something profound about why Dexter works as a story and why it keeps pulling people back, even 20 years after it first aired. Every season of Dexter follows the same emotional arc. Dexter starts the season believing he has achieved some form of balance. Maybe he's found a partner who understands him, like Miguel Prado. Maybe he's built a family life that feels real, like the marriage to Rita. Maybe he's suppressed his urges entirely, like the decade of sobriety in New Blood. Whatever the specifics, the season begins with Dexter in a place of relative stability. He believes, or at least hopes, that this time it will be different. This time the darkness won't win. Then a new threat appears. Not just a physical threat, but an existential one. A villain who forces Dexter to confront something he has been avoiding. Brian Moser forced him to confront his origin. The Bay Harbor Butcher investigation forced him to confront the possibility of being caught. Miguel Prado forced him to confront the danger of trust. The Trinity Killer forced him to confront the impossibility of having a normal life. Travis Marshall and Professor Geller forced him to confront the nature of his own hallucinations. And on through every season, every antagonist, every moral test. By the end of the season, something has been taken from Dexter. Something he valued, something he didn't know he needed, something he can't get back. His brother, his anonymity, his wife, his sister, his son's innocence. Each loss is permanent and cumulative. The Dexter who emerges at the end of each season is slightly more broken, slightly more isolated, slightly further from the human connection he keeps reaching for and keeps being denied. This is what makes Dexter a tragedy rather than a thriller. Thrillers are about overcoming obstacles and emerging victorious. Tragedies are about fundamental flaws that cannot be overcome, only managed, and the inevitable destruction that those flaws cause. Dexter's flaw is not that he kills people. His flaw is that he believes he can kill people and still have a normal life. Every season punishes him for that belief. And every season, he goes back to believing it again. The twists are the mechanism through which the punishment is delivered. They are not random shocks designed to generate water cooler conversation. They are structural elements of the tragedy, each one representing a moment where the universe corrects Dexter's delusion. You thought you could have a brother? Brian is dead. You thought your secret was safe? The bodies have been found. You thought you could have a friend? Miguel betrayed you. You thought you could have a wife? Rita is dead in the bathtub. You thought your sister could handle the truth? Deborah killed Lagerta and lost her soul. You thought you could escape? Your son shot you. This pattern is why the weaker seasons of Dexter feel unsatisfying. Seasons 5, 6, and 8 all follow the same basic structure, but the twists don't land with the same force because the stakes are lower or the villains are less compelling. Lumen Pierce, leaving at the end of Season 5, doesn't carry the same weight as Rita's death because Lumen was introduced and removed within a single season. She didn't have years of accumulated emotional investment behind her. The Geller twist in Season 6 was predictable because the show had already established the precedent of hallucinated mentors with Harry. And Season 8's twists, Vogel's arrival, Saxon's villainy, Deborah's death, all felt rushed because the season was trying to resolve 8 years of storytelling in 12 episodes. The seasons that are universally praised, 1, 2, and 4, are the seasons where the twists feel inevitable in retrospect but shocking in the moment. Brian being Dexter's brother makes perfect sense once you know it, but the show hid it masterfully. The Bay Harbor Butcher investigation put Dexter in genuine jeopardy without relying on a single villain. And Rita's death was so devastating precisely because the audience had been lulled into believing the Trinity Killer storyline was about Arthur Mitchell. It wasn't. It was about Rita the entire time. Arthur was just the weapon. There's also a deeper thematic element at work in how the show uses its twists to explore the idea of the dark passenger. Early in the series, Dexter describes his urge to kill as a separate entity, something living inside him that demands to be fed. He calls it his dark passenger, and for years the show treated this as a given. Dexter is not fully responsible for his actions because the darkness is a force beyond his control. It's something that was done to him in that shipping container, a permanent wound inflicted by trauma, and the code is the only thing standing between the dark passenger and total chaos. But as the series progressed, the show began to question this framework. In Season 8, there is a conversation between Dexter and Harry's ghost that is one of the most important dialogues in the entire franchise. Dexter is discussing the dark passenger, and Harry challenges him. Harry says that he gave Dexter the code, but the dark passenger was all Dexter's. Dexter asks what Harry meant when he said the darkness got into Dexter too early in the shipping container. Harry explains that he meant Dexter was traumatized, not possessed. The dark passenger isn't an entity. It's a feeling, a response to trauma, a psychological scar that Dexter has given a name and a personality in order to avoid taking responsibility for his own actions. Dexter's response is devastating in its honesty. He says that if there's no dark passenger, then he is responsible for everything he has done, all the kills, all the manipulation, all the destroyed lives. If the darkness isn't a separate thing, if it's just him, then there's nothing to blame and no one to blame it on. This conversation reframes the entire series. Every twist, every kill, every moral compromise becomes Dexter's choice, not the dark passenger's compulsion. Brian Moser offered Dexter freedom, and Dexter chose to kill his brother rather than confront his own nature. The Bay Harbor butcher investigation threatened exposure, and Dexter chose to let an innocent man die rather than face consequences. Rita asked Dexter to be honest, and Dexter chose the lie every single time. Deborah discovered the truth, and Dexter chose to let her carry the weight of his secret until it crushed her. The twists aren't things that happened to Dexter, they are the results of choices Dexter made. And that distinction is what elevates the show from a procedural about a clever serial killer to a genuine exploration of moral responsibility and the stories we tell ourselves to avoid it. This theme reaches its culmination in New Blood when Harrison shoots Dexter. Harrison represents the possibility that Dexter never had. A chance to break the cycle. Harrison has the same darkness, the same violent impulses, the same trauma-born rage. But Harrison also has something Dexter never had, which is awareness. Harrison knows what his father is. He has seen the kill room. He has watched Dexter dismember a body. He knows the code. And he knows that the code is a lie because he watched Dexter kill Sergeant Logan, an innocent man, to save himself. When Harrison pulls the trigger, he is not killing his father out of anger or revenge. He is making a choice that Dexter was never willing to make. He is saying that the cycle of violence ends here, with me, right now. He is choosing justice over family, consequences over comfort, truth over the lie that kept Dexter alive for decades. Of course, Dexter survived, because this is a television franchise, and television franchises are driven by commercial considerations as much as artistic ones. But even if Dexter's physical death was temporary, the symbolic death was permanent. Harrison rejected his father. He rejected the dark passenger. He rejected the code. And in doing so, he proved that the cycle could be broken, that trauma does not have to be destiny, that a child born in blood does not have to grow up to be a killer. Whether Resurrection will honor that theme or undermine it remains to be seen. The show is still airing, new episodes are still revealing new twists, but regardless of where the franchise goes from here, the core story is complete. A boy was pulled from his mother's blood. A father gave him rules instead of therapy. The rules worked for a while, and then they didn't. And everyone who got close to the boy, the man, the monster, paid the price. Let's talk about some numbers before we wind down. The Dexter franchise, across all its iterations, includes 126 episodes spread across 11 seasons and 4 distinct television series. The original series ran for 96 episodes over 8 seasons from 2006 to 2013. New Blood added 10 episodes in 2021. Original Sin contributed another 10 in 2024 and 2025. And Resurrection's first season added 10 more starting in 2025 with a second season already ordered. Michael C. Hall has been involved in every iteration. He starred in the original series, appeared in New Blood, provided voiceover narration for Original Sin, and returned to the lead role in Resurrection. Jennifer Carpenter appeared in every season of the original run and returned as a recurring vision in New Blood. David Zayas has appeared across the original series, New Blood, and Resurrection, making Angel Batista one of the most enduring characters in the franchise. The show received 24 Emmy nominations and won 4, including Outstanding Guest Actor for John Lithgow, Outstanding Directing for Steve Schill's work on the Season 4 finale, Outstanding Main Title Design, and Outstanding Single Camera Picture Editing. The series was nominated for Outstanding Drama Series 4 consecutive years, from Season 2 through Season 5, marking the first time a Showtime drama received that nomination. On the ratings front, Dexter became Showtime's highest-rated original series during its run. It set network records for audience size, particularly during Season 7 and the original series finale. New Blood broke those records, becoming the most-watched series in Showtime's history with approximately 8 million viewers per week across all platforms. Resurrection's premiere then set the record for Showtime's most-streamed premiere on Paramount+. Critically, the franchise followed a trajectory that closely mirrored its creative quality. Seasons 1 through 4, overseen by showrunner Clyde Phillips, were met with widespread acclaim. Season 2 achieved a 96% score on Rotten Tomatoes. The later seasons under showrunner Scott Buck saw a significant decline, with Season 6 dropping to 38% and Season 8 bottoming out at 35%. The original series finale remains one of the most criticized in television history. But here's what's remarkable. Despite those low points, despite the lumberjack ending, despite the years of diminished quality, the franchise never lost its audience entirely. People kept coming back. They came back for New Blood. They came back for Original Sin. They came back for Resurrection. Because Dexter Morgan, for all his flaws, for all the questionable decisions the writers made with his character, remains one of the most fascinating protagonists in television history. He is a character who asks the audience to root for a serial killer, and then slowly, methodically reveals why that was a terrible idea. The twists are the mechanism through which that revelation occurs. Each one strips away another layer of justification, another excuse, another reason to believe that Dexter is the hero of his own story. By the end, there are no excuses left. He's not a vigilante, he's not a necessary evil, he's not a broken man doing his best. He is a serial killer who destroyed everyone who loved him. And the only thing that separated him from his victims is that he had a code. And the code, as we learned, was designed by a neuropsychiatrist as an experiment and enforced by a ghost. If you're still awake at this point, I want to leave you with one last thought. The most underrated twist in the entire Dexter franchise isn't a plot twist at all, it's a thematic one. It happens gradually across all 8 seasons and 3 sequel and prequel series. It's the slow, almost imperceptible shift in the audience's relationship with Dexter Morgan. In Season 1, you root for him, he kills bad people. He has a charming inner monologue. He's awkward and funny and trying his best. You want him to succeed. By Season 4, you're starting to worry. Rita is dead, Harrison is in blood, the costs are mounting. You still root for Dexter, but there's guilt mixed in. By Season 7, you're complicit. Deborah killed LaGuardia to protect Dexter, and part of you understood why. Part of you was relieved. And the show made you sit with that discomfort. By New Blood, you want it to end. Not the show, the killing, the lying, the destruction. You want Dexter to stop, not because you've stopped caring about him, but because you've started caring about everyone around him. The victims, the collateral damage, the people who trusted him and were destroyed by that trust. And when Harrison pulls the trigger, there's a feeling that's hard to name. It's not satisfaction, it's not grief. It's something closer to exhaustion. The same exhaustion Dexter must feel, the weight of decades of violence catching up all at once. It's the feeling of a story that needed to end, finally ending. Even if the franchise keeps going, even if Dexter survives, even if there are more twists and more seasons and more victims. The essential story is told. The question has been answered. Can a monster become a man? No. But his son might. And if you've made it this far, you've traveled through nearly 20 years of television history, from a shipping container in Miami to a snow-covered field in upstate New York. From a 3-year-old boy in his mother's blood to a teenager with a rifle, choosing to break the cycle his father never could. You've met killers and cops and lovers and liars. You've watched a man build an elaborate fiction out of donuts and small talk and blood slides hidden in an air conditioning unit. You've watched that fiction collapse, rebuild, and collapse again, each time leaving more wreckage behind. The twists were the punctuation marks in a very long sentence. And the sentence, if you boil it all down, says something simple and sad. You can't outrun what you are. You can only choose what you do with it. Dexter Morgan chose wrong. Over and over, for decades, he chose wrong, and the people around him paid for it. But somewhere in upstate New York, or maybe somewhere on the road, Harrison Morgan is still out there, still carrying his father's darkness, still deciding what to do with it. And maybe, just maybe, he'll choose differently. That's the whole story. Every twist, every betrayal, every death, every lie. From beginning to wherever the franchise goes next. If you're still listening, thank you for staying. And if you drifted off somewhere along the way, that's perfectly fine. That was always the plan. Sleep well and try not to dream about shipping containers. Actually, before we let this story rest entirely, there are a few more twists and moments worth exploring in detail. Because some of the most significant turns in the Dexter franchise don't get talked about as often as Rita's death or the ice truck killer reveal. But they shaped the show in ways that are just as profound. And since this is a sleep video and we have nowhere to be, let's dig into them. One of the most underappreciated twists in the original series happens in Season 2, and it involves Dexter's adoptive father, Harry Morgan. Throughout Season 1, Harry was presented as a hero, a good cop, a loving father, a man who made the best of an impossible situation by giving his traumatized son a framework for survival. The code was Harry's gift to Dexter, and the flashbacks that showed Harry teaching young Dexter how to control his urges were among the most emotionally powerful scenes in the entire first season. But in Season 2, the show began to deconstruct that image. Dexter discovered that Harry wasn't just a dedicated cop who happened to adopt a damaged child. Harry was romantically involved with Dexter's biological mother, Laura Moser. Their relationship was an affair. Laura was Harry's confidential informant, and their professional relationship crossed into a personal one. This meant that Harry's decision to adopt Dexter was not purely altruistic. It was partially motivated by guilt. Harry had been sleeping with Laura. Harry's police work, specifically his use of Laura as an informant, was what got her killed. The drug dealers murdered Laura because she was feeding information to Harry. And Harry, consumed by guilt over his role in her death, took her surviving son home and spent the rest of his life trying to make amends. This revelation didn't make Harry a villain, but it made him complicated in ways the show hadn't previously explored. The code wasn't just a father's love for a damaged child. It was a guilty man's attempt at redemption. Harry created the code because he needed to believe that something good could come from the worst thing he had ever done. He needed Dexter to survive, not just for Dexter's sake, but for his own. If Dexter turned out okay, then maybe Harry's sins could be forgiven. The show deepened this exploration in later seasons. In Season 2, Dexter learned about Harry's affair with Laura through recordings and investigative work. The discovery shook him because it meant that the man he had idealized, the father whose ghost he consulted on every major decision, had been lying to him. Harry presented the code as an act of pure love. In reality, it was an act of complicated, guilt-ridden, self-serving love. Real love, perhaps, but muddied by secrets. This matters because it colors every subsequent conversation between Dexter and Harry's ghost. When Harry appears in later seasons to offer guidance, the audience knows something that young Dexter didn't. Harry wasn't a saint, he was a flawed man who made terrible mistakes and spent the rest of his life trying to outrun them. Sound familiar? Harry and Dexter are more alike than either of them would admit. Father and son, both living double lives, both hiding behind codes of conduct, both destroying the people they love. The most gut-wrenching payoff of the Harry storyline comes in a flashback shown across multiple seasons but crystallized in Season 2. Dexter learns that Harry visited him in the hospital after catching a young Dexter dismembering an animal. Or perhaps it was after Harry saw the result of one of Dexter's first kills. The specific trigger varies depending on which account you follow. But the result is the same. Harry, the man who built the code, the man who spent years preparing his son to be a functional killer, walked into a hospital bathroom after seeing what his creation had become and killed himself. He overdosed on medication. He couldn't handle the reality of what he had made. This twist retroactively transformed the entire first season. All those warm flashbacks of Harry teaching young Dexter, they weren't just training montages, they were the prologue to a suicide. Harry's death wasn't a natural passing, it was the direct result of creating the code. He built a system to manage a monster, and when he finally saw the monster in action, the horror broke him. Dexter carried this knowledge for the rest of the series. The father he worshipped had killed himself because of what Dexter was. The code that defined his existence was created by a man who couldn't live with the consequences of that creation. Every time Harry's ghost appeared to offer advice, there was a painful subtext. This man didn't survive knowing the truth about Dexter. Why should anyone else? Another set of twists worth exploring in more detail involves the supporting cast and how their storylines intersected with Dexter's secret in ways that amplified the show's central tragedy. Sergeant James Dokes, as we discussed, was the one cop who saw through Dexter's mask. But what makes Dokes' story truly tragic is that he was right about everything and it destroyed him. Dokes served in the military. He had seen darkness before. He understood, on an instinctive level, that Dexter's pleasant demeanor was a performance. He tried to warn people. Nobody listened. Laguerta dismissed his concerns. The other detectives found his obsession with Dexter annoying. And when Dokes finally had the evidence to prove what Dexter was, he ended up dead in a cabin explosion, framed as the very monster he had been trying to expose. Dokes' famous catchphrase, "Surprise motherfucker," became a meme and a cultural reference point. But beneath the meme is a genuinely heartbreaking story. A good man who did everything right and still lost. A soldier who survived combat zones only to be killed by an arsonist in the Florida Everglades. A cop who trusted his instincts, followed the evidence, and died for it. The show named the Season 7 finale after his catchphrase, which was both a tribute and a cruel irony. The surprise in that episode wasn't Dokes' vindication. It was Deborah shooting LaGuerta to prevent Dokes' name from ever being cleared. Then there's the matter of Frank Lundy, the FBI agent who led the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation in Season 2, returned in Season 4 with a singular focus. He was no longer hunting the Butcher, he was hunting the Trinity Killer. Lundy had spent his retirement studying Arthur Mitchell's pattern, and he came back to Miami because the pattern had resurfaced. Lundy and Deborah reconnected. Their relationship, which had been romantic in Season 2 despite a significant age gap, rekindled. And for a brief window, it seemed like Lundy might actually crack the Trinity case. He had the experience, he had the patience, he had the analytical mind. And then he was shot and killed in a parking lot alongside Deborah, who survived with a gunshot wound. The initial assumption was that the Trinity Killer had targeted Lundy to protect his identity. But the real shooter was Christine Hill, Arthur Mitchell's daughter. Christine had been dating Quinn and using her relationship to access information about the investigation. She killed Lundy not because she was ordered to, but because she was desperate to prove her loyalty to a father who barely acknowledged her existence. This twist was significant for several reasons. First, it removed the one person besides Dexter who was capable of catching the Trinity Killer through conventional investigation. Without Lundy, Miami Metro was essentially flying blind. Second, it revealed that Trinity's influence extended far beyond his direct kills. His family, his daughter, his abused wife, and children were all victims and enablers of his violence. Third, it deepened the parallel between Trinity and Dexter. Both men had families that suffered because of their secrets. Both had children who were damaged by proximity to a killer. The difference was one of degree, not kind. And then there is the matter of Hannah McKay, who deserves more attention than she sometimes receives in discussions of the show's major twists. Hannah was introduced in Season 7 as a witness connected to an old murder case. She had been the teenage girlfriend of a spree killer named Wayne Randall, and she had participated in several of his murders before turning state's evidence and receiving immunity. But Hannah's past was darker than the official record suggested. Dexter discovered that Hannah had continued killing after her deal with the prosecution. She had poisoned people quietly and efficiently without ever being caught. She was, in other words, exactly like Dexter, a killer hiding in plain sight. The only difference was method. Dexter used knives and plastic wrap. Hannah used poison. Their romance was the most controversial relationship in the series because it forced the audience to confront something uncomfortable. Dexter had spent years with Rita, a woman who loved the mask but didn't know the man beneath it. Rita's love was genuine but uninformed. She didn't know what Dexter was, and her ignorance was what allowed the relationship to function. When she died, the loss was devastating because it represented the death of innocence, the end of the illusion that Dexter could maintain a normal life. Hannah was different. Hannah knew exactly what Dexter was, and she loved him anyway. Not the mask, not the performance, the real Dexter, the killer, the man who kept blood slides as trophies and dismembered bodies in the dead of night. Hannah saw all of it and chose to stay. This should have been what Dexter always wanted, someone who accepted him completely. But the show was smart enough to show why that acceptance was its own kind of danger. When two killers love each other, there are no guardrails. There's no one to say this has gone too far. There's no moral compass because both compasses point in the same direction. Dexter and Hannah enabled each other in ways that were thrilling to watch but deeply destructive. They planned to flee the country together, abandoning everything, leaving Miami and all its ghosts behind. And they almost made it. If Saxon hadn't shot Deborah, if the hurricane hadn't hit, if a dozen other dominoes hadn't fallen, Dexter and Hannah might have escaped to Argentina and lived happily ever after, or at least as happily as two serial killers can live. But the show couldn't allow that because happy endings for serial killers aren't happy endings. They're horror stories told from the wrong perspective. And Dexter, whatever else it might be, was always honest about that. There's one more element worth touching on before we truly wind this down, and it's the way the franchise has used mirrors throughout its run. Every major villain in Dexter is a reflection of Dexter himself, showing him a different version of what he could become. Brian Moser was Dexter without the code, a killer shaped by the same trauma but without any structure or restraint. He showed Dexter what happens when the darkness has no rules. The Bay Harbor Butcher investigation showed Dexter the consequences of his actions laid bare. Dozens of bodies, all connected, all traceable, all evidence of a life spent killing. Miguel Prado was Dexter with a partner, someone who shared the impulse and the justification but lacked the discipline. He showed Dexter that sharing the darkness corrupts it. Arthur Mitchell was Dexter with a family, a killer who had maintained a double life for decades, proving that it was possible but at a monstrous cost. He showed Dexter that the life he wanted would destroy the people he loved. Travis Marshall was Dexter with a hallucinated mentor, a killer guided by a dead man's voice, acting on instructions from someone who existed only in his mind. He showed Dexter that the line between coping mechanism and psychosis was thinner than he thought. Isaac Serco was Dexter motivated by love instead of compulsion, a killer who didn't enjoy the violence but engaged in it because someone he loved had been taken. He showed Dexter that there were forms of darkness he hadn't considered. Hannah McKay was Dexter without guilt, a killer who accepted herself fully, without the internal conflict that plagued Dexter every day. She showed Dexter what peace might look like and why it might be dangerous. Kurt Caldwell was Dexter without a code at all, a killer who targeted the vulnerable, who preserved his victims as trophies, who operated not out of compulsion or justice, but out of pure predatory instinct. He showed Dexter and Harrison what unchecked violence looks like. And Harrison was Dexter with a choice, the one mirror that showed a different reflection, not what Dexter could become, but what Dexter could have been if someone had given him the option to say no. Each villain was a version of Dexter. Each twist was a collision between Dexter and his own reflection. And each season ended with the mirror shattering, leaving Dexter staring at the broken pieces, trying to figure out which fragment showed the truth. That's the genius of the show. It isn't about the kills. It isn't about the forensics or the police procedural elements or the cat and mouse games. It's about identity, about the stories we tell ourselves to justify the things we do, about the masks we wear, and the moment, the inevitable moment when the mask slips. So there you have it. The complete history of Dexter's biggest plot twists, from a shipping container in Miami to a billionaire's compound in New York City. From a brother's betrayal to a son's bullet, from the creation of the code to the moment it stopped working. If you fell asleep during the Trinity Killer section, that's understandable. Rita's death is the kind of story that's easier to process with your eyes closed. If you drifted off during the Bay Harbor Butcher, you probably dreamed about dokes, and honestly, that's a good dream to have. If you made it all the way to the end, to this exact moment, then congratulations. You now know more about Dexter Morgan than most people who have actually watched the show. Either way, the story is told. The lights are low, the narrator is winding down. And somewhere in the dark, in a shipping container, or a lumberjack's cabin, or a New York City apartment, Dexter Morgan is still out there, still fighting the dark passenger, still pretending to be normal, still waiting for the next twist. But that's his problem, not yours. Your only job right now is to close your eyes, let the words fade, and sleep. Good night. Actually, there are a few more scenes and moments that deserve to be told in full detail. If you're still with me, these are the quieter twists, the ones that don't make the listicles but stay with you longer than the big reveals. One of the most important scenes in the entire franchise happens in Season 4, Episode 9, titled Hungry Man. It's Thanksgiving at the Morgan house. Rita is cooking. Cody and Astor are helping set the table. Deborah is there. Everyone is together. And for a few minutes, the scene looks like any Thanksgiving gathering on any television show. Normal, warm, safe. Dexter sits at the table and looks around at the faces of his family and friends. And in his voiceover, he says something that reveals more about his character than almost any other line in the series. He wonders if the people around him are who they claim to be. He wonders if they have secrets. He wonders if anyone at that table is wearing a mask the way he wears a mask. Then Rita asks everyone to say what they're thankful for. And Dexter immediately shuts it down, claiming he doesn't want the food to get cold. Because Dexter can fake a smile, he can fake a conversation, he can fake interest and concern and affection, but he cannot fake gratitude. Gratitude requires genuine emotional access, the ability to recognize what you have and feel something real about it. And Dexter, at this point in the series, isn't sure he can do that. But then Cody, Rita's young son, speaks up. He says he's thankful for Dexter. Just that. Simple and sincere. And Dexter has no response. He doesn't know what to do with it. A child loves him, genuinely loves him, and Dexter can only sit there in silence because the emotion is real, and he doesn't have a protocol for real emotions. This scene matters because it happens just a few episodes before Rita dies. Cody's declaration of love for Dexter becomes retroactively devastating once you know what's coming. The child who was thankful for Dexter is about to lose his mother because of Dexter. The warmth of that Thanksgiving table is about to be replaced by the cold horror of a crime scene bathroom. And Dexter, who couldn't even participate in a simple expression of gratitude, will spend years after Rita's death wondering if he ever truly loved her or if she was just another part of the performance. There's a parallel scene later in the same episode that's equally significant. Quinn and his girlfriend Christine are saying goodnight. Quinn leaves, Christine closes the door and walks happily across her apartment. And then there's a knock. She assumes it's Quinn coming back. She opens the door with a smile, and standing there is Arthur Mitchell, the Trinity Killer, her father. Christine looks at him and simply says, "Hey Dad." That one line, "Hey Dad," reframed everything about Christine's character. She wasn't just Quinn's girlfriend. She wasn't just a reporter covering the Trinity case. She was the daughter of the season's primary villain, hiding in plain sight, operating right next to the investigation. The casualness of her greeting, the familiarity, the lack of surprise, all of it told the audience that Christine and Arthur had been in contact for a long time. Their relationship was established and ongoing, and nobody knew. This reveal connects to one of the broader themes of the franchise. The people closest to monsters are often the most complicit. Christine killed Frank Lundy to protect her father. Deborah killed Lagerta to protect her brother. Sally Mitchell endured decades of abuse to maintain the fiction of Arthur's normal life. In Dexter's world, love doesn't protect you from monsters, love makes you an accessory. Another scene worth revisiting in detail is the moment in Season 6 when Dexter finds Professor Geller's body. He's been hunting Geller for the entire season, believing him to be the mastermind behind the Doomsday killings. Travis Marshall has been presented as Geller's puppet, a weak-willed student doing his professor's bidding. The show built an entire season around the dynamic of mentor and student, teacher and disciple, with Geller as the manipulative authority figure pulling the strings. And then Dexter opens a freezer and finds Geller's body, frozen, decomposed, dead for years. Everything the audience had seen between Geller and Travis was a lie. Every conversation was a hallucination. Every argument was a man arguing with himself. Every order Geller gave was Travis's own psychosis giving him permission to do what he wanted to do. The mastermind was dead. The puppet was the puppeteer. This twist was controversial among fans because many had guessed it beforehand. The show had planted clues, intentionally or not, that attentive viewers picked up on. Geller never interacted with anyone besides Travis. He was never seen by other characters. He never touched anything or moved anything in scenes where other people were present. For viewers who caught these details, the reveal was confirmation rather than surprise. But even for those who saw it coming, the scene carried weight because of what it implied about Dexter. Travis hallucinated a dead mentor who guided his killing. Dexter hallucinated a dead father who guided his killing. The show was drawing a direct, uncomfortable line between its protagonist and its antagonist. If Travis was insane for talking to a dead professor, what did that say about Dexter's conversations with Harry? The franchise has never fully resolved this question. Harry's ghost exists in a narrative gray area. He's not literally real, but he's not purely delusional either. He represents Dexter's conscience, his memory of his father's teachings, his internal debate about right and wrong. But the Geller twist pushed the audience to consider the possibility that Dexter's grip on reality might be more tenuous than he lets on. There's another quiet moment worth noting, this one from New Blood. After Dexter and Harrison discover Kurt Caldwell's underground bunker full of preserved victims, Harrison says something that catches Dexter off guard. He says that Dexter has saved thousands of lives by killing the killers he's killed. It's meant as a compliment. It's Harrison trying to frame his father's work in the most positive possible light. A son, desperate to believe his father is a hero, constructing a narrative that justifies everything. Dexter doesn't correct him, he lets the statement hang in the air. And in that silence, the audience feels the weight of every unjustified kill Dexter has ever committed. Dokes, who was innocent, Liddy, who was just trying to do his job, the random man in the bathroom in Season 5, Logan, who would die just a few episodes later. Dexter hasn't saved thousands of lives, he's taken hundreds, and only some of them deserved it. Harrison's statement is the code in miniature. It's the lie that makes the killing palatable. The story that transforms a serial killer into a vigilante hero. And Dexter's silence is the tacit endorsement that keeps the lie alive. He could have told Harrison the truth. He could have said that the code isn't perfect, that he's made mistakes, that innocent people have died because of him. But he doesn't, because the lie is too comfortable, and because, on some level, Dexter needs his son to believe it. This is the final twist of the entire franchise, and it's not a plot twist at all, it's a character twist. Dexter Morgan, the man who built his life on the code of Harry, the man who kills killers because a dead cop told him to, discovers that his son believes in the myth even more fervently than he does. Harrison sees Dexter as a superhero. And Dexter, who knows better, who knows that the superhero story is a lie designed to contain a monster, chooses to let his son believe it anyway. Until Logan dies, until the myth shatters, until Harrison picks up the rifle and ends the story the only way it could have ended. The real twist of Dexter isn't any single revelation. It's the cumulative effect of all of them. Season by season, death by death, lie by lie. The show strips away every justification until all that's left is a man in a room with a knife and a body, and the only honest thing to say is that he wanted to do it. Not because the code demanded it, not because the dark passenger compelled it, not because society needed it, because Dexter Morgan wanted to kill, and everything else was just the story he told himself to make it okay. That's the twist. That's always been the twist. And it took 126 episodes, 4 series, and almost 20 years of television to fully reveal it. Sleep well. One more thing before the lights go fully dark. There's a conversation that happens in Season 8 between Dexter and the ghost of Harry that I think about more than almost anything else in the franchise. It happens after Dexter has been dealing with the brain surgeon case and the emotional fallout of Vogel's revelations about the code's origins. Dexter is driving, Harry is in the passenger seat the way he always is during these internal conversations. And they start talking about the dark passenger. Dexter says the phrase the way he always does, like it's a scientific fact. Like the dark passenger is a diagnosable condition with a name and a treatment plan. Harry gave him the code. The dark passenger demanded the killing. These are the two pillars of Dexter's self-understanding. But Harry pushes back. He says he gave Dexter the code, but the dark passenger was all Dexter's invention. Dexter is confused. He thought the concept came from Harry. Harry explains that Dexter came up with the term when he was about 12 years old, and Harry just let it slide because the feelings were too complicated for a young boy to process. It was easier to let Dexter believe the urges were caused by something external, something that had gotten into him in the shipping container like a parasite or a possession. It gave Dexter a way to distance himself from his own impulses. Harry then says something that Hannah McKay had also been telling Dexter. Maybe the dark passenger is just a feeling, not a separate entity, not a force beyond his control, just a feeling, the way anger is a feeling, or sadness, or hunger. Something that arises, demands attention, and eventually passes. Something that can be managed without being obeyed. Dexter's response is one of the most honest lines in the series. He says that if there's no dark passenger, then he is responsible for everything he has done. The full weight of every kill, every manipulation, every destroyed life, all of it falls on him. Not on a trauma response, not on a childhood wound, not on a shadowy presence that crept inside him in a pool of blood. On him, Dexter Morgan, the man who chose every single time to pick up the knife. Harry's final observation in this scene is the most chilling line in 8 seasons of a show built on chilling lines. He says it's a whole lot simpler to just pin all the blame on something else. And then he adds that it's much scarier to think that the dark passenger is no more real than he is. Think about what that means. Harry is a hallucination. Everyone knows that. Dexter knows that. The audience knows that. Harry Morgan died years ago. The figure sitting in the passenger seat is a projection of Dexter's subconscious, a manifestation of the code, a storytelling device that allows the audience to hear Dexter's internal conflict played out as dialogue. And Harry, the hallucination, is telling Dexter that the dark passenger is also not real. The two pillars of Dexter's identity, the code that was given to him by Harry and the dark passenger that was implanted in him by trauma, are both fictions. The code was actually designed by a neuropsychiatrist as a behavioral experiment. The dark passenger is a metaphor that a 12-year-old invented to avoid taking responsibility for his feelings. Neither of them is what Dexter believed it to be. And without them, there is no framework. There is no justification. There is just a man who kills people because he wants to. This conversation is the real climax of the entire series. Not Rita's death, not Deborah's discovery, not the lumberjack ending or Harrison's gunshot. This quiet, in-the-car, ghost-to-living dialogue is the moment where the show tells you, in plain language, what it has been about the whole time. Dexter Morgan is not a sympathetic anti-hero burdened by forces beyond his control. He is a man who made choices. Terrible, irreversible, destructive choices. And the elaborate mythology of the dark passenger and the code was just the story he told himself so he could live with those choices. The tragedy isn't that Dexter can't stop killing. The tragedy is that he could have, at any point, at any time. He could have chosen differently, and he didn't. Not because he couldn't, but because he didn't want to. Because the killing felt good. Because the ritual satisfied something deep and permanent inside him. Because the mask, the donuts, the small talk, the pretend normalcy, all of it was exhausting. And the only time Dexter felt fully alive was when he was taking someone else's life. That is the final twist. The one the show spent 8 seasons, 10 New Blood episodes, 10 Original Sin episodes, and an ongoing resurrection series building toward. The monster isn't in the shipping container. The monster isn't a passenger. The monster is just a man. And with that, we're really done this time. Every twist, every death, every betrayal and revelation in late-night kill-room conversation. The complete story of Dexter Morgan, told slowly and thoroughly, the way a story like this deserves to be told. The television is off now, the screen is dark. The only sound left is whatever ambient noise fills your room at this hour, the hum of an air conditioner, the ticking of a clock, the distant sound of traffic or crickets or nothing at all. Close your eyes. Let the stories settle into whatever part of your mind handles fiction and memory and the space between sleep and waking. Tomorrow, you'll probably forget half of what you heard tonight. That's fine. The details don't matter. What matters is the feeling. The slow, steady pull of a story that knows where it's going and is in no hurry to get there. Good night, and remember, don't get caught. If you're curious about one final statistic before everything fades, here it is. Across the full run of the original series, Dexter Morgan killed approximately 134 people. Some sources put the number slightly higher or lower depending on how you count assists, indirect kills, and situations where Dexter set events in motion but wasn't the one holding the knife. But the ballpark is around 134 confirmed kills across 8 seasons. That's roughly 17 per season, almost 1.5 per episode. Of those kills, the vast majority fit the code. Murderers, rapists, predators who had escaped the justice system. People the audience could agree deserved what was coming to them, but not all of them. Some were innocent, some were collateral damage, some were people who simply knew too much or stood between Dexter and his freedom. And the show never let you forget that. Every innocent death was a crack in the code. Every unjustified kill was evidence that the system Harry built wasn't as airtight as Dexter needed it to be. The franchise has now been part of the cultural landscape for nearly 2 decades. It premiered in the same era as Breaking Bad, Mad Men, and The Wire. It is part of the golden age of television, the era when cable networks proved that small-screen storytelling could rival and even surpass the ambition of cinema. And while Dexter's later seasons may have dimmed the show's critical reputation, the high points remain untouchable. Season 1's Ice Truck Killer reveal. Season 2's Bay Harbor Butcher investigation. Season 4's Rita. These are benchmark moments in television history, scenes that influenced how future shows approach plot twists, villain construction, and the slow burn destruction of a protagonist who started as a hero and ended as something else entirely. The story continues with Resurrection. New twists are being written right now. New victims are being added to the count. New lies are being constructed and new masks are being worn. Dexter Morgan is still out there, somewhere between the man he pretends to be and the monster he's always been. And as long as there are stories to tell about him, he'll keep coming back. But not tonight. Tonight the story rests, and so should you.